네, 안녕하십니까. 세계의고고학 국제학술대회 사회를 맡은 국립문화유산연구원 고고연구실 김혜정입니다.
Hye-jung Kim from the Archaeological Research Division of the National Research Institute for Cultural Heritage will be serving as
오늘
an MC
학술대회에
today.
참여해주신 네
I would
분
like
여러분께
to
감사드립니다.
welcome
그럼
all
지금부터
of you
세계의고고학
for
고대
joining
왕릉을
into
주제로
the
국제학술대회를 시작하도록
academic
하겠습니다.
symposium, and we would like to
나눠드린
kickstart
리시버의
the
1번
international
채널은
conference on
한국어,
world
2번 채널은
archaeology.
스페인어,
So
3번
channel 1 is
채널은
Korean,
영어입니다.
and number
어제
2 is Spanish, and
토크
number 3 is English
말씀드렸는데
language.
자신
As I
있으신
mentioned
분은 2번이나
during
3번을
the
이용하셔도
yesterday's
됩니다.
talk concert, if you're
그러면
confident, you
저희
can also tune
세계의고고학
into channel 2
학술대회에
or 3.
간략히
I will briefly
소개해드리겠습니다.
introduce the
이번
international
학술대회는
symposium.
ICCROM과
Today's conference is
국립문화유산연구원,
organized in
국가유산청,
collaboration with ICCROM
한국고고학회, 한국문화유산협회가 공동으로
also
주최하는
organized
학술대회입니다.
by the National
이번
Research Institute of
학술대회는
Cultural Heritage,
지난해
Korean Archaeological Society, Korea Cultural Heritage Association. The conference was organized as part of the MOU for Cultural Heritage Management signed last year between ICCROM and NRICH to shed light on the current status of our tomb research and preservation policies through research on ancient royal tombs around the world and to raise public interest in cultural heritage. Yesterday, the talk concert was held for the general public, and today's conference is for those who are studying archaeology, archaeological professionals working to discover our history at excavation sites, and those who are dedicated to preservation and utilization of cultural heritage. It will be a great opportunity to discuss in-depth research methods and preservation policies of ancient royal tombs from an international perspective and the role of ancient royal tombs in the 21st century. And the discussions we have today at this conference will be incorporated into the World Archaeology Series that will be published next year. And first, I'd like to welcome Administrator Choi Eung-cheon of the Korea Heritage Service for his opening remarks.
안녕하십니까.
Good
국가유산
afternoon.
총장
I'm Chang
최영찬입니다.
Chun, the administrator of the Korea
먼저
Heritage Service.
주간의 세계의고고학
First of all, we're here
고대
to hold the two-day international conference on world archaeology, ancient royal tombs. Let me extend my gratitude to Director Seya Pasapera Rojas from the Huaca Rajada Sipán Site Museum and
국립문화유산연구소
Heidi
치아파스 센터의
Aurea Magana from INAH Chiapas Center from Mexico.
어렵습니다. 발음이 어려워요.
Very difficult to pronounce.
그리고 토론을 맡아주신
As well
경기대학의
as our
강봉호
discussants,
그리고 문화유산
Professor
위원장님 강봉 교수님과
Kang Bong-won, who
경북대학교
is
이성주
the
교수님
head
감사합니다.
of the Korea
또한
Cultural Heritage Association
한국고고학회와
and Professor
한국문화유산협회
Lee Sung-ju from
관계자를
Kyung
비롯한
National University.
모든 국내외
I'd also like to
관계자
thank the Korea
그리고
Archaeological
현장과 온라인
Society, Korea
생중계로
Cultural
함께해
Heritage
주시는
Association and their
모든
members,
분들께도
as well as stakeholders from home and
이번
abroad and
학술대회는
participants
작년
joining
6월
us both online and offline.
국립문화유산연구원과 이크롬이
This symposium is being
문화유산의
held
보존
as part of
관리를
the
위해
agreement
체결한
signed in June
업무
between
협약의
Enrich and
일환으로
ICCROM for the
세계의
preservation
스판 유적,
and management
멕시코의
of heritage
팔렌케 유적과
through
같은
case studies on
세계의
ancient royal
고대
tombs such
왕릉에
as
대한
Peru's
조사
Sipán
연구
site
사례를
and
통해
Mexico's Palenque site,
대한민국의
will be able to
보존조사와
diagnose
보존
Korea's
정책의
tomb
선두소를
investigation
찾아보는
and
자리입니다.
preservation practices.
국가유산청은
The
2013년부터
Korea Heritage Service since 2013 has been supporting ICCROM's Preservation Expert Program in the Asia Pacific and the World Heritage Leadership Program. Last year, we jointly conducted academic research and conference.
그 연장선인 이번
As
학술대회에서는
a continuation of such collaboration, this conference will provide a window to case studies on ancient royal tombs registered as World Heritage from Peru to Mexico to Korea to compare and review preservation practices. From a global perspective, we'll be able to explore the investigation and preservation policies of royal ancient tombs and the role of tombs
오늘 국내외
that
전문가
they hold in the
여러분께서
21st
들려주신
century.
이야기들은
Going forward,
향후 대한민국
the Korea Heritage
국가유산의
Service
가치를
will
적용하고
collaborate closely with
조사 연구
ICCROM to
분야의
promote the
미래 방향을
investigation,
모색하는 데
preservation,
큰
and utilization
밑거름이 될
of
것입니다.
Korea's heritage on the global stage. And your
앞으로도
discussions will provide
국가유산청은
great insight in
대한민국의
doing
주요
so.
문화유산들이 세계적인 관심 속에서 조사되고 보존,
And we will
활용될 수
do
있도록
our utmost
이크롬과
best in
적극
order to
협력해
support
나가겠습니다.
such activities in
끝으로
collaboration with
뜻깊은
ICCROM.
행사를 준비해
Before
주신
closing, I'd like to thank Enrich and
국립문화유산연구원과
ICCROM for preparing for this
관계자
meaningful
여러분에게
event
진심으로
and wish
감사드리며
for the
일교차가 큰
good
시기에
health of all
모두
participants
건강하시길
amidst the
기원합니다.
fluctuating
감사합니다.
temperature. Thank you.
오늘 학술대회는 국제기구인 세계문화유산
So today's
보존 복구
academic
연구센터
symposium international
이크롬과 공동으로
conference is
주최하는
co-organized
행사인데요.
with ICCROM.
아르나 프란체스타 마리아 구스랄 사무총장님께서
We
참석을
have
못하셨지만
congratulatory
축사를 영상으로
remarks from
보내주셨습니다.
Secretary General
함께
Arna
보시겠습니다.
Francesca Maria Gusral. Please have a look.
Distinguished host, esteemed administrator of the Korea Heritage Service, Director General of the National Research Institute of Cultural Heritage, esteemed professors and participants, the archaeologists and researchers. It is my great pleasure and honor to open the international conference jointly organized by the National Research Institute of Cultural Heritage of the Republic of Korea and ICCROM, focusing on world archaeology, ancient royal tombs. This is the second conference organized in close collaboration between ENRICH and ICCROM, reinforcing our shared commitment to advancing collaborative research, disseminating academic results through translations, and implementing joint courses on heritage conservation for both movable and unmovable heritage. This year's themes brings into focus ancient royal tombs, featuring case studies and examples from Korea and Latin America. Tombs have been central to archaeological investigations and research since the dawn of the field. These heritage places stand as testaments of the interaction between human societies and their surroundings, reflecting their belief, socio-cultural and political systems. Tombs embody the profound connections between our world and the spiritual realm, offering a window into how past civilization understood the afterlife, immortalizing their hopes, dreams and fears in the form of monumental structures and artifacts. Preserving this heritage site is not just a matter of safeguarding relics from the past, it is about maintaining a profound connection between the past and the present. Our task is to ensure that these treasures continue being well preserved and meaningful for the people of today. This conference will delve into how these places have been conserved and protected over the centuries. You will explore the progresses made in the discovery, research, conservation and management worldwide and examine policies and archaeological practices bringing local, regional and international experiences. I would like to take this opportunity to express ICCROM's deep appreciation for the commitment of the Republic of Korea and the continued support for our work through technical expertise, knowledge sharing and financial contributions. This includes support for our activities, including the Regional Initiative for Sustaining and Promoting Heritage Collection in Southeast Asia, COLASIA, and the World Heritage Leadership Program. Through this collaboration, we have made significant strides in the conservation and management of heritage, including archaeological sites and collections. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all the distinguished presenters, practitioners, and participants, and all those who have contributed to the organization of this conference. I wish you all enriching, insightful, and stimulating discussion and exchanges. Thank you. 감사합니다.
다음으로 기념 촬영이 있겠습니다.
Now we're
발표와
going
토론을
to
해주시는
take a
분들과
commemorative photo
국가유산
taken.
청장님,
I'd like to ask all the
국립문화유산연구원
panelists
원장님,
and speakers
국립고궁박물관 관장님,
and
학술대
the
관계자
administrator
여러분께서는
of the
앞으로
Korean
나와주시기 바랍니다.
Heritage Service and the General Director of ENRICH and everyone from ICCROM to come to the front part of the room.
오늘은 주제 발표 4건과
So we
토론까지
have
준비되어
4
있어서 빠르게 좀
presentations and
진행을
panel
해야 할 것
discussions
같습니다.
planned in the program, so we
그럼
have to
본격적인
speed the
발표를
proceedings up.
시작하도록 하겠습니다.
So we're going to go straight into the
이크롬의
first
토마스 메라즈
presentation.
카스타뉴 선생님께서
Thomas Meras
고고학적
Castaño of
유산
ICCROM
보존을
will
위한
give a
설명이라는
presentation
주제로 첫
on the
번째
topic of
발표를
setting the
해주시겠습니다.
scene for
그럼 발표
archaeological heritage
부탁드립니다.
conservation. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. It's such a pleasure, a honor for me to be here. I'm really grateful for Enrich, for the Korean Heritage Service, for all the help and the collaboration. I will be speaking of a Western history of the theory of conservation applied to archaeological sites. And this has been part of a very long tradition in many countries and many conservation traditions and practices that myself, I was forming this, let's say, this heritage of understanding archaeological sites, royal tombs, but also artifacts and the material aspect of conservation. So I call this presentation setting the scene for conservation of for heritage conservation. It's mostly archaeological, but it is not also not only applied to archaeology. It goes also beyond archaeology, and I will share in between some of these Western tradition of conservation case studies and examples that ICCROM carried out in the very early stages in royal tombs in Egypt, in Romania, in Bulgaria, as part of this consolidation of the practice of the theoretical aspects of archaeological conservation. So I'm going to start with the very beginning on what is the archaeological heritage. I know you all know Spanish, so I just stated the Lausanne 19 article in Spanish, but I have the translation here in English. Archaeological heritage is the part of the material heritage for which archaeological methods provide primary information. It includes all vestiges of human existence and consists of sites related to all manifestations of human activity, abandoned structures and remains of all kinds, including subterranean and underwater sites, together with all the portable cultural material associated with them. This is in the 90s, so at the end I will just mention it again briefly. But it includes both artifacts that were buried or that are underwater. And I mention all of these typologies because in many countries the law considers specific situations of objects that sometimes are not well recognized in other traditions because the law does not recognize archaeology on the surface. In other countries, like in Mexico, we have a lot of archaeological remains that were never buried, but they are still considered archaeology. In other traditions, some remains on the surface are considered historical, for example. So archaeology combines a lot of categories and typologies. It can be incomplete or unstable elements. The notion of ruin, it is, has accompanied archaeology for a very long period. And any other artifacts. In some countries, the category of industrial archaeology is even recognized and protected as well as other kinds of archaeological artifacts. What characteristics can be drawn to a generally speaking is that they are incomplete or in the state of ruin. They are not visible until they are researched or investigated. And the research destroys a lot of material when excavation is carried out. So it is controlled destruction. I know it can be a little polemic saying this, but at a certain extent, for conservators as myself, we need to understand that when some processes of archaeology are carried out, we are destroying part of the context. And they are vulnerable when they are exposed. They become again exposed to conditions, to the air, to water, so they enter again in a cycle of deterioration. Why should they be preserved? I here just present a couple of examples of archaeology on the surface that was covered by the Vesuvius explosion in the 1st century in Italy, that you might know, Pompeii. Or like Templo Mayor, the main city in Mexico belonging to the Aztec Empire, the Mexica civilization, that was covered, and then the Hispanic city lay on top of it, and then it was uncovered starting in the late 70s. So both are archaeological remains. Both they were formed in a very different process. These remains can be preserved due to utilitarian interest, political interest. Usually they become part of the national discourse of the nations they have that have access and discover or uncover these materials. There is an aesthetic interest, a religious aspect to it, an interest in the past, and also it's and there is also a very strong stress nowadays in educational aspect of the archaeological remains. So how has archaeological conservation been carried out, at least in the Western tradition? We can draw a storyline starting from the 18th century with the Italian architect Cavaceppi that specified at the time that he would complete a statue to be preserved with aesthetic value. So the aesthetic value was a really big part of his work, and he left this manual on how we should keep masterpieces in a complete way so they can be perceived by everyone with a whole image. There is also this very famous case study of the Laoconte that at the end of the 18th century and even before, the arm was reconstructed in a more victorious way, and then they found information that it was probably not the original aspect that the statue had. So then it was intervened and restored for many times. And we have also examples as the Colosseum that in the early 19th century, the Colosseum went significant conservation efforts. And we know about the works of Rafael Stern interventions in 1807. This is 19th century. And he focused a lot on stabilizing the structure and reinforcing the outer walls with substantial brick these wedges to prevent the further collapse. So for him, it was very important to provide the archaeological remains with structure stability. Then subsequently, some years after, Giuseppe Valadier took over the work that was started by Stern. And he emphasized the preservation of the arena's original architectural integrity. Valadier added buttresses to the southwest side and cleared debris from to reveal more of the ancient structure. So these efforts marked the beginning of a more systematic conservation practice at the Colosseum, prioritizing the structural stabilization, but also the historical authenticity. So Valadier's intervention is not as evident and balances a little more the structural with the aesthetic aspect of the conservation. Valadier also did a lot of work in the Arch of Titus, and he used another stone different from the original fabric of the arch. So he introduced in an academic environment the use and differentiation of materials when performing conservation. This is a current view of the Arch of Titus in the Roman 40 in Rome. And then I will mention a little on Viollet-le-Duc, which is a French architect that a little later on the 19th century. His philosophy centered on the idea of restoration as a creative act, a very well documented but creative act. And the goal was not merely to preserve the structure in its existing state, but to restore it to a condition that might never have existed before. So if you perform well documentation, you can even imagine and complete the monument to its best state possible. One of his works is this basilica in France, Sainte-Madeleine-Vlessé, which was completed based on this philosophy of someone, if someone studies enough the style and the materials, he would be able to produce the final product that even at the time of construction was not achieved. And another very famous work of Viollet-le-Duc is the Carcassonne city, where he basically reconstructed all the wall, all the towers, saying that he was really an expert on what happened at the time of the creation, and he achieved this final state, super complete, with a complete lecture of the city and the materials. On another hand, answering in this romantic period in Europe, there was John Ruskin, which his approach to conservation was fundamentally opposed to the practices of reconstructing and finishing things. He believed in the ruin and that we should left the ruin to die. He explained in his a book, The Seven Lamps of Architecture, that you might know about it, that each aspect of the conception of the ruin should be kept, and we shouldn't be adding materials nor trying to complete anything that was not done before. I have to say that he never actually performed any conservation as Viollet-le-Duc in France was doing, so he was more on the philosophical reply in this context at the end of the 19th century. And then it comes in towards the 20th century, the international aspects of cooperation and the early stages of the international society and experts putting towards interest and guidelines for everyone to better perform conservation. So there's the 1906 meeting in Madrid, and then the 1908 London meeting of architects, the Congress, both the International Congress of Architects. And then they started speaking of the unity of style before, and then no unity of style. So a lot of discussion in this theoretical realm was taking place to find at the end a little more balanced discussion that was done in Buenos Aires in Argentina on the regulations for a more balanced approach to conservation of monuments. I'm speaking a lot of monuments now. It's a little far from the tombs, but we will get there. So another important character is Sir Arthur Evans. He was very well known due to his excavations in Knossos in the island of Crete in Greece. And he had a philosophical approach to conservation that was at the time both innovative and controversial as well, because he believed in the active reconstruction of archaeological sites to bring ancient civilizations to life for contemporary audiences, to give a lecture for the current public or the users of the heritage, and also to balance some reconstruction, not to go a little overboard with them. So this is a general view of one of the temples that was part of Evans' work. This is a very famous fresco, the Leaping Bull fresco. Also work with this, trying to balance reconstruction, but giving the public a lecture on how it was looked. And finally, I will mention just Carter, who had a very systematic approach to retrieving the objects found in the King Tut tomb. And this marked also a very long tradition for many agencies, European agencies working in other countries on retrieving objects and then putting them to storage and then for exhibition. So a lot of the Western tradition on archaeology was started here, and the way conservation followed started in this period with these notions, or a more balanced approach for these goods to be shown to the public, but also to be kept in a non-reconstructive way. I will mention briefly the Athens Charter that many of you might know, which set also a really long and impactful discussion on the direct intervention of principles, the notion of respect of all historical phases, no reconstruction, and the notion of anastilosis to bring together the structures that were recently discovered. Also the notion of reburial, and a lot on the public education. There's also the International Conference on Excavations in Cairo in the late 30s, also calling to international cooperation on technical manuals, on protection of vestiges, and the importance of qualified people performing any archaeology or also conservation. This is just one example in Mexico, Chichen Itza, that and many archaeological sites saw a lot of conservation work done on these principles of the Athens Charter in the 30s. Also, the use of new materials was very highly introduced in these early works, as the use of cement, that nowadays we're still working with them, but with a lot of discussion on the new stability and presentation to the public, used these new materials at the time that were thought to be really well for conservation, that we learned they weren't at most of the cases, but it was an effect that in many countries in the Western tradition saw this happening in the early 30s and then the decades coming. Then the World War II, in Europe at least, set the discussion on how to deal with the recent ruins and promoting educational and scientific and cultural cooperation to recover that was damaged during the war. And a lot of post-war documents follow, and I will start to speak about ICCROM. But one of these documents, this recommendation that came in the conference in New Delhi in 1956, also the same year that ICCROM was born. Well, but at least the recommendation to have a more technical branch of UNESCO regarding conservation. Prior authorization was said to be a criteria for starting any work, and establishing official bodies to document activities and finds, and also submitting any technical work to an international audience, so they can also bring experts to have a more systematic approach for a standard called International Standard of Conservation. I will speak briefly of Cesare Brandi, who was an architect, an art critic from Siena, and among other things. And he was very much in this tradition after the war on setting what it became the scientific approach for conservation. And his lectures collected by his students became part of a very emblematic, iconic, and fundamental text called Teoria del Restauro, the theory of conservation, of restoration. And according to his view, after the war, conservation should be part of acknowledging a timeline of an object or an artifact or even a monument, and the legitimate moment to perform conservation is the present, when you acknowledge all of the historical aspects, aesthetic aspects, material aspects, and you use a lot of scientific information to perform the decision on conservation. Another very important charter that follow, and that it's still a big part in conservation discussions, is the Venice Charter of the 64, which just it's this year is its birthday again, and a lot of notions on authenticity, on no reconstruction, were recovered from the post-war times and brought to a international agreement. Also on the use of traditional materials and the caution on the use of modern materials, acknowledging the use of cement that was causing a lot of trouble around the world. I will briefly mention the early stages of ICCROM working in archaeological technical visits and missions together with UNESCO, particularly that the initial one that was following the 56 recommendation from UNESCO on having a more technical body that lasted for decades at ICCROM, and it was the mission from Cesare Brandi to Egypt to the monuments of Nubia and also Egyptian monuments, and where a lot of the documentation and early professional conservation on the scientific aspect that we now have inherited these days came from these missions that lasted from the 69 at ICCROM. We inherited part of Cesare Brandi's work and lasted till the 80s. So we have a very, very huge documentation and a lot of conservation work that was done by ICCROM experts at the time. This is some pictures of Harold Plenderly, the first Director General of ICCROM, which is on the right side upper corner. On this very long mission where he gathered a lot of information from the Nubian monuments, and he also then followed with technical visits to restore frescoes in some of the most iconic tombs. I will briefly mention the presence of Laura and Paolo Mora, were two very well-known conservators of mural paintings. A lot of conservators, as myself, were formed from their tradition and their insistence on using scientific approach to understand the materials and the technical ways that they were used and the manufacturing ways they were produced at the time, and then the proposals in a critical way to address and find balance between reconstruction and lecture. In these years, a lot of samples were collected by ICCROM specialists that now we have at the ICCROM archives. This is just some examples of the multiple samples that Moras collected in Egypt, just alone in that very long permanent mission. And now we have access to this recently recovered and organized sample archive. So I'm sure that if someone is interested, it's available in our website. But those samples were collected during this period of the early stages of international cooperation on technical conservation. And they were revisited and reanalyzed multiple times to address understanding on how things were done, what was used at the time. And this comes from this past comes from the Nefertari tomb in Egypt. I will go quickly due to the time, but this is another example of a Trajan tomb in Bulgaria that became also a UNESCO mission in the 60s, that the analysis in a scientific way was part of the beginning, since the very beginning, that to become eventually a UNESCO site. The very Director General, Harold Plenderly, was marking all of the documentation where the samples were taken from for scientific analysis, and then the proposals that came after. So ICCROM provided then technical training to those in the front lines of heritage conservation in those days, addressing these needs, where when professional and scientific conservation was still in the making to become like the profession that we know, and that you have also a very strong scientific conservation philosophy. This was done. These are examples on a monastery in Romania, the Humor Church, where this is the samples that were taken back to ICCROM for analysis. And this is the tomb chamber before and after restoration in the 70s, all done in these periods, followed by the Moras and then by the national specialists trained by the international cooperation. And then there was a follow-up on conservation of tombs in 2004 and 2005 by the current, at that time, the Nicholas Stanley Prize, the Director General, but also other specialists and colleagues that still are working in the field. These are some pictures from the early 2000s on the Trashan tomb. And ICCROM experts having interesting discussions on the mural paintings. And just to finalize, now the current approach to conservation that applies for royal tombs, but it is a general approach to conservation, is a more integrated approach where it is not only the scientific aspect or understanding the structure or the material, but also connecting it to the context, the people, and the society. So the 72 Convention paved the road for this broad international collaboration framework. The Burra Charter was also a very famous and fundamental discussion, and we still discuss the latest version is a little older than 10 years. But the concept of criteria for cultural significance was very prevalent at this charter, and addressing the cultural values. We at ICCROM speak a lot on cultural values as part of any approach to both conservation or management. And finally, they came the Charter for Protection and Management for Archaeological Sites in the 90s that I just cited in the very beginning of my presentation, the NARA document on authenticity that came from Japan, and then the 2003 Principles for Preservation and Conservation of Mural Paintings. So you see there's a lot of connection between going directly to the materials and the problems they saw, and then slowly translating it to a broad international collaboration frameworks, always connected to sites, peoples, and then for us to be enjoyed and in a sustainable way. So this is just a brief summary on what's the current criteria, let's say, not only for royal tombs, but also for archaeological conservation, is respect for the integrity, authenticity, the imperative on interdisciplinarity, the imperative to document whatever we do, to monitor, to evaluate, the sustainability aspect of it. And the criteria on the material aspect is the minimal intervention, compatibility of materials, reversibility or retractability, as we call it now. We prefer that term. So this is just an overview on how conservation and theory applied, and I thank you so much for your time. Sorry for going a little over, but thank you so much.
발표 잘 들었습니다. 토마스 선생님께서
Thank you
여러
for
가지
that great
원칙들을 설명해
presentation.
주시느라 주어진 시간보다 조금 오버가
It's become a
됐는데요.
little
다음
longer because he
발표부터는
was
좀
very keen on
시간을
explaining
준수해서
the
발표해
principles.
주셨으면
I
합니다.
hope the other
다음은
presenters
최근
could
시판에서
be keen
얻은
on their
새로운
time management.
통찰력과
We'll now
그
move on to the
문화적
presentation
영향을
on new
주제로
insights from the
페루의
latest tombs of Sipán and their cultural impact. The presenter is Seira Pasapera Rojas, director of the Uacarajara Sipán Museum. Please welcome her with a round of applause.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por esta invitación. Voy a tratar
Good
de ser breve,
afternoon.
aunque para hablar
Thank
de
you
Perú,
very
pues, se
much for
necesita
inviting
bastante
me
tiempo.
to this
Tenemos
great
una
event.
etapa cultural bastante amplia. Lo que ustedes
Today
pueden
I'm going
observar es
to
el
talk
área
about the
monumental del
overall
sitio
environment in
arqueológico
Peru. It will take a long
Son
time,
estas pirámides
but let
hechas
me
de adobe, que
make
son
my
una suerte
efforts
de
to
ladrillos
make
sin
this
coser.
brief.
Y
So
cerca está
I'm
el
going to
museo del
focus
sitio,
my
del cual ahora
presentation
soy la
on
directora,
the
y donde
Sipán
hemos
site, and in
empezado
the
un
picture
trabajo
you
que
can
busca
see the
conservar el
adobe
patrimonio cultural
pyramids
a través
that
de
we have
esta
uncovered.
interacción con las poblaciones con las que se
And
está
right now
rodeado y
in
con
the
quienes tenemos
museum,
algunas
the
dificultades.
discovered
Un poco para ubicarnos,
archaeological
la zona
artifacts
en la que
are being
hemos
preserved, and
centrado
we are
esta
working on
investigación
how
se
to
ocupa
better
en
preserve
esta
these
zona
sites.
sudamericana
So
y
let
del
me
país de
begin my
Está
presentation
ubicado en
on
la
the
costa
Sipán
norte.
site.
Es un área
So
bastante
Peru
seca,
is
bastante
located
desértica,
in
y
Latin
es uno de los
America,
principales
and
retos
this
que estas
site
culturas
is at the northern
prehispánicas han
part of
tenido en
Peru,
este lugar. La cultura
which
de la
is
cual les
in
voy
a
hablar
very
ahora es
arid
conocida como
temperature.
las mochicas o los mochis,
And
y están
in the
extendiéndose
past, the
en un territorio de
Moche
casi 600
civilization,
kilómetros a
called
lo largo de la
Mochica
costa
in
peruana.
Spanish,
Les decía
flourished
que
in
este
this
espacio es un
area,
área muy
and
seca,
this was
y las
before
gentes que vivieron allí tuvieron que
we had the
desarrollar una serie
Incan
de tecnologías para
civilization.
lograr que su subsistencia
And the residents in this area for survival had to be keen on managing water effectively. And in this region, in order to survive and live in harmony with the surroundings, they had to go through a lot of challenges. Peru has a lot of different traditional tribes that have been growing their culture. And in the case of Sipán, I mentioned that it's in the northern part of Peru, and it was located in a valley. So to talk a little bit more about the Moche civilization, the capital of Moche civilization was called Moche, which was a valley. And the culture was divided into the northern Moche and southern Moche civilization. And these were almost like deserts. And I'm going to talk about the tombs that were discovered in this region that include the tombs of a lord that was at the highest class in the Moche society. Before we go into the Sipán tombs, I would like to introduce various books that's about the Moche civilization. So here you can see symbolic patterns that was often used by Moche civilization, through which we can get an insight into the rituals and ceremonies that were conducted by the Moche people. Here in the picture you can see people who are the elite of the Moche society. So here you can see two different stories of the structure, and in the Moche society they have used human sacrifices. So in the second story you can see the elite high-ranked classes, including the priest. The priest would use human sacrifices to get the blood for their ceremonies, and you can also see that the elite are wearing more ornaments than other people. In Sipán, we have discovered a lot of artifacts, including those that were owned by the Lord of Sipán. So what you see in the deck include all of the artifacts that were uncovered from the site. So we have found it very difficult to restore all of the artifacts, and we have also discovered tombs where we have found mummies that were wrapped in layers of fabric. And we also found wooden coffins that have contained these mummies, and the principal burials had a lot of different retainer burials with them. Before coffins were used, so in the initial stage of the Moche civilization, we could see that pardo was used, which is a method to cover or wrap the bodies in layers of fabric. Inside the tombs were gaps in the walls so that various artifacts could be buried and stored. So with the passage of time, we saw that the people of Moche started to use wooden coffins only for the elite class.
En el caso de Sipán, para hablar un poco de la conservación, nosotros hemos tenido un periodo bastante delicado.
So of course preservation is significant for the Sipán site, and in the case of this archaeological site, before the 80s there were a lot of thieves looting the site. There were some cases of the residents looting the tombs because of the economic stress of the region at the time. So they would sell the artifacts that were buried illegally. And in the 80s, the Peruvian police started to pay more attention to the preservation of the heritage, and especially our archaeologist Walter Alva and other archaeologists started to investigate this site. And with this, they raised awareness on the importance of these sites among the residents. At the time, archaeologists faced a lot of threat because there were residents who had to live on looting that felt threatened. So the archaeologists were blackmailed to suspend their investigations and excavations. So the excavation started from 1987 to 2000, and during this period we were able to discover 13 different tombs. So if you look at the slide, you can see the surrounding of the site where there is a river. And in the Moche civilization, they conducted religious ceremonies with human sacrifice. And the area is surrounded with arable land and farmlands, as well as the river and hills. On the hills, mythical beings resided because this symbolized their connection with the gods. All of the architecture is made with a material called adobe that uses clay. So preserving the heritage is a big challenge for us, given the climate change. That makes the heritage site very sensitive to the environment. And at the bottom, you can see a pyramid that's 5 meters. And at the highest pyramid, rituals were conducted with the priests leading this ceremony. And we can see other pyramids that were used for politics and administration. So we call this political and administration pyramid. And you can also see 2 other architecture, one of them being a site used for funerals, and you can see also the architecture for the northern area. So in total, we can see 4 different buildings. So below the funeral architecture, we found 3 different stories. and each stories had tombs that had different owners. So this was the first tomb, and we have named this the tomb of the Lord of Sipán. And we were able to uncover the buried mummies, alongside which we found numbers of artifacts that were made with gold, silver, and copper. At the same time, along with the principal burials, the artifacts were placed in different locations, including north, south, east, and west. In the case of archaeologists,
quienes constantemente nos amenazaban de muerte para que se vayan y dejen esto para que pueda ser vendido.
it is significant for them to understand how to preserve the artifacts and the burials. And as I've mentioned, we had a lot of thieves in the area surrounding the site. So preservation was surrounded by a lot of challenges. In this slide, I'm going to go into the details of the artifacts. The most important artifact that was uncovered is at the center, which is a half-moon crown. And we were also able to find a royal staff. And you can also see the burial chamber. So other than the principal burial, you can see various sacrificed retainers. In the case of the principal burial, it was interred in the wooden coffin, but in the case of the sacrificed retainers, they were interred in a coffin made with sugar cane, including 2 women. And they were lying on the side. And we could also uncover the remains of a dog that was buried as a sacrifice. And at the central burial chamber, we could find a young man that was buried as a retainer, and his feet were cut off because his feet were cut off in order to protect the Lord, the principal barrier, eternally. And we could see other tombs as well, where we could see the retainers that we call as guardians. And here you can see many different artifacts, and with the artifacts we were able to understand the social class of the owners of the tombs. That included the lords and priests. However, we have never uncovered a document that could support our speculation. So through the artifacts, we just have to rely on guesswork on the social class and authority of the principal burial. So the artifacts include crowns, artifacts, and earrings and nose rings. And we could also find garments that were sewn with metal ornaments. And for each artifact, we could find multiple patterns that were engraved. So we were able to see some patterns that give insight to the religion and faith of that time. And here you can see the earrings, nose rings, and a crown.
ciertas reacciones humanas como la tristeza o la alegría. Es alguien
that
que tiene un
provide
rostro
us with a
estático.
window to understanding their
Les decía que
social
se
class.
encontraron 13
And
tumbas hasta el
on the
año 2000.
artifacts and
El equipo estuvo
ornaments,
trabajando
we
ahí en la
were
primera
able
campaña
to
de
see the
investigaciones.
patterns
Apareció
to
una segunda
understand their
tumba y con el
religion.
pasar del
And
tiempo
this
se iban
is
sumando cada una.
tomb number
Esta
2.
para nosotros también
And
tiene especial
here,
importancia porque el personaje tenía
Sipán
una copa. Si
priest
ustedes recuerdan en la imagen que vimos anteriormente y que la vuelvo a compartir, el
was
segundo
the owner.
personaje que le entrega una copa
And
tiene
as
este
you've
efecto
seen
y un
in the
disco
previous
similar a lo que
slide,
usan los
in the
sacerdotes
case of this
católicos ahora.
high priest,
Esas
he is
características
holding
de
a
objetos
glass or
hicieron
a
llegarle
cup.
su nombre. En
So
este caso, el sacerdote de Sipán.
he's,
No tenemos un
I
nombre como en
believe,
el caso de ustedes que se
the
sabe cómo
equivalent
se llama
of
el
a
personaje.
Catholic
Por eso
priest.
nosotros tenemos la responsabilidad de acuñarle un nombre específico.
In
Con el
Korea,
pasar del tiempo y de ver que en esta
the
tumba
owners
también habían
of the
acompañantes y
royal
objetos muy
tombs
simbólicos,
are
como por
known in
ejemplo,
some
en este
cases.
caso se enterró una
However, in
serpiente
the
que está muy
case of the
relacionada a los
tombs
temas
of the Moche
místicos, a los temas de la
civilization,
vida, a la
we
forma
could
y el
not
movimiento de
find
este
any
reptil.
document
Conforme fueron
that could
avanzando
validate
el
our
análisis de los
speculation
objetos que
on the
fueron
owners
limpiados
of the
e
tombs.
intervenidos y
So,
conservados,
as mentioned,
muchos de ellos
we had to
restaurados
name
en
the
la primera
tombs
etapa en la que se
with our
estaba en
own
una situación
discretion.
incipiente de conservación. Hoy hemos cambiado un poco este procedimiento.
So, in the
Se fueron
first round of
completando objetos como los que pueden
investigation,
ver en este
we
caso,
found
la corona,
multiple
muestra un
artifacts
animal
that were
muy
excavated
así como en el caso de las
cautiously,
pinturas de
and
Corea,
we
cada
strive
pasta
to
elige a un
restore
animal que lo va a
them to their
representar. En Sipán,
original
los más
shape.
antiguos o los más tempranos muestran
And
al
we
búho como el
could
animal
find the
totémico más
models of
importante.
animals
¿Por qué? Por las
as well from the
características del animal,
Sipán site.
básicamente, visión
And
nocturna,
one of them is in the
mucha
shape
fuerza
of
en el
an
momento y
owl.
precisión de la caza, el movimiento de la cabeza. En el arte moche vemos a
In the
hombres con
case of
características
this
humanas de forma
owl,
muy común. Un hombre venado, un hombre zorro, un hombre cangrejo.
it is
En fin,
an
está
animal
tratando de
known
asumir
to
las
be very
características biológicas del
strong
animal que
when
el humano
attacking
quisiera
on
tener.
its
Y los
prey,
sacerdotes casi siempre
and an
están
animal that
relacionados al
has
búho,
a
porque
wide field of
además a
view.
este personaje mítico se
So,
lo asocia con la muerte. Ellos
the
tienen el poder
priests
y el
always
nexo
were
con la muerte misma. En este personaje hay dos
envisioned
colores que llaman mucho
in
la
the shape
atención
of
de
an
todos los
owl,
objetos que él tuvo.
so we believe
Muestran
that the
cabezas
owl
humanas,
has
la
a
mitad de ellas
close
sonriente y la
connection
mitad
with
de
the
ellas
priest,
tristes,
and
hablando
on the
simbólicamente
head
casi
of
siempre
the
de la
priest we
dualidad,
could
la
see
felicidad y la tristeza, el día y la
ornaments
muerte,
that
lo
symbolize
masculino y lo
the spread
femenino, la
wings
noche
of
y el
an
día, que
owl.
son cosas que a
And
nivel
here
mundial
you
se han
can see the
manejado en
necklace
muchas
with
culturas.
facial
Luego
expressions
aparece una
of
tercera tumba,
happiness
esta
and
es mucho más
sadness
antigua, la del señor de Sipán, está fechada
that
más o menos
symbolize
desde el año
life
600
and
después de
death,
Cristo, y esta en particular
according
era
to
muy rica
our
también, con una
speculation.
cerámica además exquisita,
And
diferente
this is
a la
from
del señor
tomb
de
number
Sipán.
3.
Pero estaba en una forma diferente. No tenía un ataúd, estaba envuelto en
So
tela.
we call
Era
this
una
tomb
fosa
the
simple,
tomb
lo cual
of the
nos ubicó
old
además
lord of
estratigráficamente
Sipán.
en un tiempo un poco más
So
temprano. Este
was,
personaje
we
también tiene
believe,
un cetro y
built
ciertos elementos que nos
in
han
BC
permitido denominarlo como un
600.
señor, pero es mucho más antiguo.
In
En ese
AD
tiempo, los
600,
arqueólogos decidieron
and we were
llamarlo
able
el
to
viejo señor de
uncover
Sipán.
a lot of
Y él en
pottery.
particular tiene
And
muchos
in the
objetos
case
con
of
un
the
marcado
remains
simbolismo
of
del
the old
dominio del
lord
espacio marino. Por
was
eso, por ejemplo, se
wrapped
puede ver
in
esta imagen
layers
que
of
les he
fabric,
mencionado, un gran
and
collar con unos tentáculos muy
from
largos.
some of the
En el arte moche
artifacts,
vemos
we
mucho
could see
una
the
fusión
pattern of
simbólica de
marine
cómo han
life
interpretado el mundo desconocido. En el caso del mundo marino, por ejemplo,
that
se muestra
symbolize
muy comúnmente animales o
a
en este
lot
caso,
of
por ejemplo,
things.
un pulpo o un gasterópodo que es monstruoso y que está matando a los humanos.
So we could
Porque están
see
viendo a gente que entra al mar y muchas veces ya no
octopuses and
regresa.
other
¿Cómo están interpretando
marine
este espacio
life,
desconocido?
marine
Es una de
animals
las
that were
herramientas que los
rarely
sacerdotes
seen
han
in
utilizado
other
para
tombs.
mostrar al pueblo
So
lo que ellos estaban sí conociendo y controlando.
we were able to
Algunas de las
get a
piezas que
glimpse
son
of the
narigueras,
world
que
view
son además
that
muy
is
exquisitas, con
speculated
un
to be
detallado
very
trabajo tecnológico
grand
de parte de los orfebres que además
in the
dominaron
Moche
técnicas muy
civilization.
antiguas, incluso antes
And
que
when you
en
look at
Europa,
these
como
shapes
la
and forms of the
electrólisis, como la
artifacts, we could see that the
fusión
artisans were
de
very
una sola pieza más de un
sophisticated
solo
with their
metal, como se ven en
technique.
algunas
They are metal artifacts that are elaborately patterned, and in the case of the nose ring, it is made with silver and sometimes gold. And we could also see metal alloy made with golden, copper, and silver and copper. So you can see these delicate ornaments that lead us to understand the artistic techniques of the Moche civilization, which was top-notch. And in some of the artifacts, we could see the head of a human being and the body of an animal.
Más tumbas. He seleccionado ahora esta, la número 7, porque es un personaje al que llamamos
And we
guardián,
also
que,
uncovered another tomb that was tomb number 7, and we call this the guardian tomb.
Una tumba que la hemos asignado como la número 8, y creemos que más bien este es el guardián de la tumba
In
número
this
8,
tomb,
donde se colocó
it was right next to the tomb of a principal burial, and what was interesting was that the legs of the principal burial were cut off.
Creemos que puede tener un vínculo familiar para poder ser traído de otro espacio.
And we were able to find the grave of a military leader. So we thought this belonged to a military leader because from this grave we were able to discover multiple weapons. There's a weapon called pura, which is a long baton that is used for battle. And we were also able to find a helmet, war helmet. And this is tomb number 8 and its artifacts.
Algunas características humanas como piernas y brazos que le hacen además tener esta característica bastante compleja.
And when you look at the artifacts, one of it has the body of a person and the head of an animal.
Son de privilegio para la realeza, como por ejemplo estos camélidos o llamas que son colocadas solo en la tumba de la gente de mayor poder. La tumba número 9 es de una persona que perteneció a la realeza y que tiene además una pieza muy interesante que es una nariguera cuadrangular en la que se ha retratado una escena de ceremonia en la que participa una mujer.
Llama, and we were also able to find the body of a llama. And in tomb number 9, we could not clearly find out the owner of this grave, but considering the artifacts, we believe that this was owned by a nobleman. Until the 2000s, we carried on with the first phase of discovery and investigation from 1987 to 2000. And after the 2000s, this was suspended. So until then, we have discovered 18 different tombs. And from then on, we put more efforts on restoring and preserving the discovered artifacts. And from 2007, the second phase of discovery and investigation resumed, and we were able to discover 3 additional tombs. So this is tomb number 14. Here, we named it the Tomb of Warrior Priest. And around the principal burial, we could uncover artifacts that include the belongings of a priest and also the belongings of a warrior at the same time. And the principal body was interred in a wooden coffin. And we were also able to find the pattern of an animal from the cat family. So we could understand not only the owl, but also animals from the cat family were seen as sacred. Also in Korea, inside the mouth of a principal burial, artifacts are sometimes found, and also in the Sipán site, one of the principal burials had an artifact in the mouth.
Este personaje tiene la mayoría de sus objetos en esa tonalidad verde porque tiene una gran concentración de cobre.
So this
Y el trabajo
person
aquí, además, no solo en la excavación, sino en la exposición, ha cambiado un poco
is
la ruta de lo que queremos
green,
que el visitante,
and
especialmente las
most
comunidades
of
del
the
entorno que antes
artifacts
veían en la arqueología y la investigación arqueológica un problema,
and
ahora una
the
oportunidad. Este personaje que ahora está marcado en
medals covering retainer and principal burials were metal, but were mostly copper.
La simbología y forma de los objetos en la tumba del señor de Sipán podría ser el de la tumba
And
2,
here
es el de
in
los
this
llamados
slide,
sacerdotes.
the one who holds the cup is the priest, and the person is passing the cup to the Lord.
Un grupo de arqueólogos peruanos encontraron tumbas de mujeres con objetos muy
And
parecidos, lo
until
cual es
now,
significativo,
we
incrementando
have
cada vez
never
la existencia de estos
uncovered
personajes de la
the
ceremonia
grave
epigraficada.
owned by a
Aún hasta el año
woman.
2007 no habíamos encontrado el reporte de ninguna investigación del cuarto
However,
personaje. Cuando aparece esta
we are
tumba,
still
con objetos
discovering
similares al
multiple
vestido,
artifacts from this archaeological
la corona, la
site,
nariguera y
and
otras
some
piezas
of
que se ven en
them
el
seem to
personaje
be
de la
have
imagen
been
superior,
belonged
empezamos a
to
postular que era
women.
el cuarto personaje que nos faltaba encontrar. Por supuesto, la presencia del búho es recurrente porque además este tiene funciones sacerdotales. Tiene copas además, como en el caso de otras tumbas.
So I mentioned that there was a three-storied tomb, and we believe that there is another story below that, so it's a four-storied grave. In the case of grave number 14, was we believe, the tomb of a warrior or a priest, because as I've stated, simultaneously a lot of weapons and artifacts that seem to have been used for religious ceremonies were found. So this grave good has the spread wings of an owl at the head. This person
Esta es la escena en la que nosotros estamos hablando de una rebelión
is
liderada
very
probablemente por esta
delicately
persona, y esta sería la razón
sculptured.
por la cual sus armas han sido desarmadas. Los objetos colocados dentro de la tumba muestran una complejidad impresionante. Los personajes han sido
Inside the
enterrados en el
tomb,
mismo espacio, pero a lo largo del tiempo hay
we could
evolución en el
find
edificio.
elaborately designed and crafted ornaments and artifacts. And this slide shows you the structure of a tomb.
Este es el de la 15, el más antiguo. Está
So what's
fijado a
highlighted in
100%.
yellow
Es un
is
personaje que habría
tomb
estado al
number
servicio del
16.
señor de mayor rango. Por supuesto, la investigación arqueológica
We believe
asociada a las
it
técnicas
dates
de
back to
conservación
AD
nos daría un tiempo mayor
600.
para hablar del tema, pero ahora les voy a mostrar brevemente. La tumba 16, en
And
realidad,
for
es un personaje que
preservation,
tiene una cámara
we
en
need
dos niveles
more
que rompe un poco el
efforts.
esquema del que
In the
sabemos.
case of tomb
Pero lo
number
interesante de
16,
este personaje
the
es que
main
estuvo
burial
acompañado de una
chamber
mujer y de unos
had
bebés
the
que
main
murieron antes
coffin
que él y
and
fueron
the
trasladados a su tumba para que puedan estar
supplementary
tentativamente
coffin.
juntos en
So
la
the
eternidad.
main coffin
Los objetos de este
held
personaje,
the
como
principal
collares de tres
burial,
piezas, nos hacen
and
postular que
the
sería también un señor.
supplementary coffin
Las armas
held
nos
the
hacen agregarle
held the
la
retainer
denominación de
burial.
guerrero,
And you
lo
can
cual
also
hace
see
que haya una
artifacts
sucesión hasta ahora
from
de
the
3
same
grandes señores,
grave.
además de sacerdotes y personajes de la nobleza. La mayoría de ellos
And
tiene coronas, narigueras,
tomb number
y otras piezas
16,
que nos
we
muestran
believe the
rituales en los
owner
que debieron
is a
estar
warrior
o
lord.
dirigiendo o participando.
We found
Hoy,
crowns
como
and nose
museo,
rings
buscamos
from the same
entrelazar
grave.
toda esta investigación arqueológica con la población que antes se encontraba como un
So
problema. y hacemos
Huacarajada Sipán Museum has been serving as a venue to disseminate our findings and discoveries with the residents. So, by displaying the artifacts that were uncovered, we were able to restore the garments that were worn by the Moche people. So this is one of the examples. And at the top left, you can see a nose
La
ring.
investigación entonces en Sipán nos lanza 16 tumbas, estas ubicadas desde el año 100 y 200 hasta el año
At the
600.
Sipán site, we continue to study the area, and until now, we have uncovered 16 different tombs, and we are striving to effectively preserve this. Thank you very much for listening.
네, 감사합니다. 발표 잘
Yes,
들었습니다.
thank you very much for the
저희도
presentation.
부엉이 장식품 복을 가져온다고 해서 많이
So in
사용하는데요.
Korea, owl
굉장히
ornaments are
인상적으로
also
봤고요.
used as a
시판에서
lucky
출토된
charm,
금은동
so very impressive.
장식품이
And
정말
gold, silver,
탐날 정도로 예쁜 것
copper
같습니다. 다시 한번
ornaments
발표를
from
해주신 세이라
the
선생님께 박수
tomb are
부탁드립니다.
really appealing. So once again,
그
thank you very
예정된
much for great
일정표보다 10분씩
presentation.
지금 좀 발표가
So we have
늦어져서요.
about 10 minutes
안내된
delay than the original
일정표보다 10분씩 좀 늦춰서
timetable.
발표를 좀
So
진행하도록
maybe
하겠습니다.
we will
다음은
now
파칼 무덤의 보존 상태에 대한 최근
push
분석을
back our
주제로
schedule 10 minutes. Next, we're going to listen to the presentation on recent analysis on the conservation status of Pakai tomb from Aida Urea Magana from NIAH Chipa Center. Please go ahead.
Buenas tardes, muchas gracias por la invitación.
Yes, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. I will try to keep to the time. So I'm going to talk about the royal tomb of Pakal the Great. So more than anything, I will focus on the topic of preservation. So you can see where the tomb is located in Mexico. So Mexico is located to the south of United States and Canada. And to the south, we have Guatemala. And you can see from this map where the Mayan civilization came to a full bloom. So this is a province of Chiapas, where Palenque site is located. So it is quite close to Guatemala. And additionally, you can also see different temples across the region. And this region have a lot of royal tombs and the rituals and temples. So it is the epicenter of Mayan civilization. So the red star indicates Palenque, and you can see the great geographical area of the map on the slide. So first thing I'm going to show you is the site of Palenque in early 20th century, before the excavation took place. It was at the center of the huge rainforest jungle, so the humidity was high, the relative humidity was almost 100, and temperature was always high. So we had thick trees covering the ground. But in the 21st century, how a lot of archaeological sites were discovered. It's marvelous. And as you can see on the left-hand side, you can see the palace. And on the right lies the royal tomb of Pakal the Great, which we've been discussing from yesterday. So the royal palace and the grave of Pakal the Great, how are they associated? And they're located in an entire huge center. And we also have a temple of inscription. The one of the longest living figure in the Mayan civilization was Pakal the Great.
Y aquí ya
And
platicamos un poco de cómo
the
este
temple
sistema
here has
constructivo
very
donde existe
detailed
dentro un túnel
inscriptions.
que lleva
So
hasta
that's
la tumba
why
de Pacal,
the name
que estuvo
was
bloqueado
Temple of
obviamente en su
Inscription.
momento para que no hubiera acceso a él,
And
fue
from the
bloqueado
top to
por Rus,
bottom,
la
you
que
will see
luego
a
Alberto
series
Rus
of
Bouvier, para
stairways.
llegar y acceder a la
And
tumba.
if you go down
Entonces es descubierta
inside
en
the royal tomb,
1952
down the
por este
staircases,
arqueólogo.
you can reach the burial
Aquí
chamber
podemos
of
ver el acceso
Pacal the
hacia la
king.
tumba.
And it was discovered
Aquí
by
todo el camino
Rose
que hay
Lillier
que
in
recorrer para llegar y
1952,
acceder
a
a ella.
renowned
Y en este
archaeologist.
sentido, aquí
And
el
as you
nivel
can see,
estamos
to
abajo
reach
del
the
nivel del
burial
suelo,
chamber,
lo cual es el
you
último
have to
problema de
travel
conservación.
many flights of
Aquí
stairs
otra vez una
underneath the
otra
ground.
ya más reciente de los registros más recientes
So
que tenemos. Y
the
aquí
burial
estamos,
chamber
insisto,
is
abajo
almost
del
on
nivel
the
del
ground
suelo,
level.
lo cual nos
So
impone
because
una
of
serie de
this,
condiciones de
there
humedad y
were a lot of
temperatura
difficulty
muy complejas.
regarding preservation efforts.
Otra, la planta,
And right below there,
y ya un acercamiento a la lápida de Pacal.
the climate of temperature and
Y al
humidity
cuarto, donde
was
está
completely
donde fueron
different
enterrados
from
sus
what we
restos,
experience outside of this
que en
tomb.
estos muros tiene una serie
And
de
this is the
relieves
lid
realizados con
for
morteros de cal
the
arena.
sarcophagus.
Ahorita les muestro
And
una
you
foto
can
mejor.
see different
Aquí está la lápida que también
reliefs
es de
surrounding
conservación.
the sarcophagus.
Aquí
And
podemos
you,
ver
see,
el
you can
perfil
see
de
the
Pacal, que
inscription.
es el rey que está,
And
que
likewise,
está en esta
the
escena, está él
preservation
como Dios del
poses
maíz,
a lot of
siembra,
challenges.
digamos, él ha sido sembrado
And as you
para
can
que
see
crezca
from
el
here,
maíz y renazca.
Hakal
Esta
the
es un poco
Great
la
was considered
simbología que
the
los
lord of corn.
epigrafistas han
Corn
tratado
was a
de-
mainstay
han podido descubrir
food for
recientemente.
everyone in the at the
Bueno, un
time.
poco los-
So
está
Hakal
rodeado
was
de una serie
described
de
as the
personajes
Lord
que están
King
marcados
of
en este
corn.
plano. Aquí algunos de los levantamientos que hemos
And at the
empezado a
time
hacer.
of excavation, we could see a lot of different retainers and offerings and sacrifices that were entombed together with the king. As I've mentioned before,
Ayer hablé un poco de cómo estaba obstruido todo el
regarding
acceso a
the
la tumba
archaeological site of
con
Pakal
mortero
the
de
Great,
cal y arena
the
que,
highest
impedía el
priority is
acceso.
preservation.
Y que
When it
cuando
was
hay
first discovered,
referencias
it was
de Rus,
consist
habla de cómo los
of
trabajadores
lime,
al retirar estos
mortar, and
materiales se
sands.
quemaban las
So they were
manos,
basically
porque
surrounded
la cal
by
no había
lime and
fraguado,
sands. It was
no
almost
había endurecido,
impossible to penetrate
porque no había
into the
acceso
burial
de aire
chamber.
al interior del túnel.
Particularly, limes were not
Todo
properly
estaba
hardened.
relleno, entonces no había acceso
The
del
reason
aire,
being
y
is
los
where
que
lime
ustedes
can
manejan
only be hardened when
la
it comes
forma
to
en que la
contact
cal
with the
endurece,
external
necesita
air.
aire para
But
poder
because of the
endurecer.
contact was not appropriately and
Aquí
adequately
como
made,
estaba el acceso a
hardening
la
did
tumba
not take
con
place.
esta lápida
As workers
triangular, el
can
momento donde
can be
hacen el descubrimiento,
burnt from
acceden
the
a la
contact
tumba
with the
y encuentran un
unhardened
ambiente
lime.
similar al de una cueva, es un ambiente
At the time of
kárstico,
discovery,
donde
these
existe la
photos have been
formación de
taken,
estalactitas y
and the
estalagmitas,
environment and climate
porque
there
el edificio está
is
colocado
quite
encima de una montaña,
karst
está
environment.
construido sobre una montaña que permite que el agua se transmine y pase hasta el interior.
So the site is
Se forman
located
todos
almost
estos,
on the top of the
compuestos
mountain.
que recristalizan sobre la superficie. Entonces aquí
And,
podemos ver en el momento del descubrimiento
the
cómo
royal
encontraron todas
tomb,
estas estalagmitas que se
was
estaban formando.
basically penetrating into the
Y
ground
aquí
inside the
podemos ver un
structure.
poco cómo
So it
accede
had
la
very
humedad
unique
por la parte
ambience
de atrás del
inside.
edificio e
Again,
incluso
you've
por la parte
seen many
delantera a
pictures that were
través de
taken at the
las
time,
juntas
and we can see from this drawing how humidity and air can permeate
imagen.
into the
Y este
structure
proceso
from
fue
outside.
continuo durante más de
Other
1000
images also
años
show
antes del
the
descubrimiento.
similar principle.
Entonces,
For
esto dio
about
lugar a la
1300 years
formación de
before
estas
the
estalactitas y
excavation,
estalagmitas
this
como una cueva.
environment continued on.
Y los muros de,
During
de
the
la
first
cripta se
discovery,
encuentran, cubiertos
we saw a
con
lot
relieves
of
modelados, ahorita vamos a
stalactite
hablar de ellos, que son
and
los 9 señores
stalagmite.
de la noche, se le conocen así en la iconografía maya,
Because of
que
the
son los
lime
dioses que
structure, it's
presiden
almost
los estratos del
as if we are
inframundo y que
walking
tienen
into
que
a
recorrer Pacal
ice
para llegar al inframundo y para
cave.
llegar a
And there
estrato,
were
digamos,
reliefs
después
of
de la
9
vida.
different gods,
Entonces estos
gods of
personajes
night.
se encuentran ricamente ataviados con conchas, peces, orejeras,
And-
una vestimenta compleja. Aquí está un dibujo de alguno de ellos
The owner of the
y
barrier
aquí está una imagen de
had
estos relieves de estuco.
elaborate
Son el principal
ornaments,
problema de conservación en
shells,
esta tumba,
feathers, many diverse ornaments and offerings buried with the deceased. But as I've mentioned, lime was the main culprit. Because lime did not come to a full hardening, preservation was most difficult in this environment. As you can see, the masks are expressed and the feathers are quite visible on the reliefs, the jewelry, and you also see a jaguar skin scar. So probably the skin of jaguar was used to put together an investment that were worn by priests. The royal tomb was presented to the general public, and almost 300 and 400 viewers came into the structure, and many had to travel down the staircase. So these pictures were from 80s and 90s. You can see how people are climbing up the stairs to visit the royal tomb. Because of the bodily temperature of the visitors, and because of the contact with the temperature, with the air people bring in, temperature rose, and you can see there were so many visitors, and in order to ensure safety, the lighting installation was built into the royal tomb. Because of the incandescent bulbs, algae started to form, and the pores of different algae and plants were transferred inside the royal tomb through the footwear of the visitors. So contamination reached as far as reliefs and sarcophagus, and as you can see, people wanted to visit this place because it was most mysterious and interesting. So a large crowd visited a royal tomb, temperature rose, leading to growth of algae. So the reliefs color slowly changed from green to black. And I've mentioned multiple times, the lime was not properly hardened, but as it comes into contact with the air, the air brought in by the spectators, CO2 formed, and inside was still soft, and external part was hardened. So inside the structure, the softened and the pasty-like lime remained, but the external side or facade got hardened drastically. So before the excavation, the internal climate or the atmosphere was really stable. We didn't see much change, but with discovery and visits by many spectators led to drastic fluctuation of the internal climate, and some of the stuccos start to fall off from the wall, leading to quite serious concerns. So I am showing you a picture with the roaring sea. So the level of concern and level of impact, negative impact, was as severe as that. So a series of analyses started to take place. So analyses were done to understand the composition of lime, stucco, and samples were taken, and more research was done into the composition of lime paste to understand the reasons for deterioration and to come up with the solution to the problem. As you can see, when you poke the stucco, it was almost as creamy. They were in a pasty form, and a lot of papers covered the chemical analysis on the composition of the stucco. It was done as recent as in 2000. And there was an analysis of a descending composition analysis, microscopy X-ray, and the results told me the main material was lime that contains a lot of magnesium, and it had high level of H2. It can absorb a lot of water, leading to slower progression in hardening. And we have done numerous rounds of chemical analysis, and as you can see, because of the change in humidity and because of the saturation of moisture, condensation started to form, and as condensation started to fall on stuccos and reliefs. So the process of forming CO2 and sodium magnesium and calcium carbonate crust, through this series of the improvements in our understanding, we could see how different layers of crust form on stucco and reliefs. So in the case of Palenque, so calcium carbonate issue didn't happen that often elsewhere, but in the tomb of Palenque, it was quite pronounced. The issue was really severe. So ultimately what we did was to come up with the solution. So the situation was lime with a high content of magnesium was used, and hardening was not adequately done, making the stucco more vulnerable to wide variance of temperature and humidity. And the stucco experienced erosion and absorption of moisture, and it ultimately led to the falling of different pieces from the reliefs in stucco. So we could identify the mechanism behind the loss of the material from the wall of the stucco, and in order to prevent this from happening further, it was crucial to block the chemical reaction. So it was crucial to sustain the climate that was there for 1,300 years. So how to do that? So the answer was to seize the visit and presentation of this royal tomb to the general public. So afterwards, we have installed different devices which allowed us to see the climate inside the tomb, monitoring of different elements and conditions, and we are also showing a 3D presentation of the royal tomb. So through this 3D museum, visitors were still allowed to enjoy the experience. So again, you are seeing the process with which we installed different devices for monitoring. And I personally live in Chiapa, one of the urban areas. From Chiapa to reach the jungle, it's almost 8 hours drive, and the roads are not friendly, of course. So in order to reduce this type of travel requirements, we have installed different devices to enable remote monitoring. But at the same time, the developments around the area is quite active for agricultural and livestock farms. So other changes are taking place all the time, leading to different set of challenges emerging for preservation. So what we are working on is to look for a good mortar compound using a resin
adentro de la tumba,
maybe
básicamente
we
para
can
hacer
come up with an optimal
estabilización muy
material
puntual, muy
for
local, de
preservation.
relieves.
We are in the process of conducting different
Son todos los materiales que
experiments.
estamos probando a largo plazo.
So we are
Con ello hemos logrado detener que
trying
algunos
many different
fragmentos
types of
no-
mortar
no
compounds.
colapsen, no
And through
caigan.
those efforts,
Y básicamente estamos
we are
dedicándonos a hacer
working
registros más
to
minuciosos de
prevent
estos
further
relieves,
degradation
con, por ejemplo,
of
escáneres de
stuccos and
luz
reliefs.
estructurada, levantamientos
And we
de
also
3D,
used structural
estamos trabajando en
scanners
ellos ahorita,
to better understand the
y
internal
verificando el estado de
structure of the
conservación
royal
continuada.
tomb.
La idea de los
Different
relieves,
investigations
el
are
escáner 3D
underway.
es también que el público pueda gozar
And
momento
our
de
intention going
una
forward
visita virtual del sitio,
is
de la tumba, porque obviamente sigue siendo un tema que
to
constantemente
have
la gente reclama
virtual
poder
presentation
ver
of
observar.
the site to the general public. Of course, this is,
Desde el equipo somos
of course, to the disappointment of many aspiring visitors, but it is inevitable. Of course, I didn't do it myself. We have different scientists and experts working at the preservation office. That has been my presentation. Thank you.
네, 발표 잘 들었습니다.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation.
오버됐던 시간을
So,
줄여주셔서 더
You have
감사합니다.
helped us get back
그
on time. Thank you so
소개해주신
much.
palenge 유적은 유네스코
And the
세계문화유산으로
Palenque
등재된 유적입니다.
is
고대 마야
currently
문명의
registered
대표적인
as World
도시이기도 하고요.
UNESCO Heritage, and it's also a
발표해주신
city of the
파카란 문명의
Mayan
부족들이 앞으로
civilization.
고대 왕릉의 관리와
And I
보존에
believe the
대한
preservation
보존과 기회에 대해
efforts will
국제적인
provide
관점에서
more
검토해 볼 수 있는
international
자료인 것 같습니다.
opportunities
아이들
to
선생님께 박수
understand more
부탁드립니다.
about the practices of preservation. A big hand, please.
다음 발표는 이크롬의
We'll now
니콜
move on
프란체스니
to the
선생님께서
presentation
고고학적 유산
by
관리를
Nicole
위한 접근
Francescini
방식이라는
from
주제로
ICCROM, who
발표해
will talk about
주시겠습니다.
heritage place
박수
approach to
부탁드립니다.
archaeological heritage management. A big hand, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Apology, I put my timer on to be sure I will not go over the 20 minutes. I have a genetic disease that is called being Italian, and we tend to speak a lot, so I'm sorry for that already. But we wanted to sort of have a fil rouge that brings together all the presentation, and specifically for this, as we have looked at the history of conservation, we have looked at conservation and management also at two very important sites. We just wanted to conclude with a short presentation looking specifically at managing archaeological sites and looking at the heritage place approach. And here I start very much where Thomas left it off, talking about where we've been in time, talking about conservation, speaking of management, and really the evolution of the heritage discourse, because over the years, we have changed the way we understand heritage. Heritage 50, 60 years ago was things. It was monuments, it was objects. Today, when we talk about heritage, we're talking about complex realities. We're looking at heritage in a holistic way and very much multi and interdisciplinarity when we're looking at our heritage places and heritage sites. And through times, we move from talking about the conservation of fabric to what we're doing today. And today, we are looking at managing places, at managing complex realities where it doesn't mean that we're not doing conservation. It means that we're putting conservation into a wider framework of understanding our sites and understanding heritage places broadly. And because here we are, many of us have studied archaeology and are working in the world of archaeology, I do believe that it resonates very clearly with those of us that have been looking at this field, but also colleagues that haven't, because to really understand an object when we're talking in terms of archaeology, what we need to understand is the site. We need to have a clear understanding of where an object is. But we can't stop there. We need to really understand a place, a site, in a broader context. We need to understand a territory. We need to understand a civilization. We need to understand how we change through times. And we're looking at management very much in the same eyes, understanding that a place can be important for different reasons. It can be important to me as an archaeologist because of its archaeological importance. My colleagues that works with protected area might look at the same place with different eyes. It might be a protected area, a marine site. My other colleague that looks at living and religious heritage might be more interested in the monastery. And these places coexist. They live near one another often. But the point is that we shouldn't be fighting one another, but we really need to find ways in which heritage builds on one another. We build on each other's strengths, and we also work with and outside our sector. Because what we understand, and I do believe that this is something that anyone who is working in the field knows this much better than me, is that we cannot put sites under a glass. We cannot close our sites. We cannot simply say, this is where the boundaries of my site are. Whatever happens outside, it doesn't concern me, so I will not care about that. The reality comes looking at World Heritage sites and World Heritage properties. If we look at the 14 main categories of impact, of potential negative impacts or effective negative impacts to World Heritage properties, we see that the vast majority comes from outside the designated properties. One of the main threats, for example, to archaeological sites today is infrastructure. And these infrastructures are not being built within the sites, they are being built nearby. In context, when we're talking about the World Heritage Convention, for example, in the buffer zone or even in the wider setting, there are cases of archaeological landscapes in southern Iraq that are being affected by dams that are built 600-700 kilometers far away. And so this is usually a photo that it doesn't always connect immediately to where we are, but I believe that once I show the upper photographs, everyone understands that this is the pyramid. This is the view of the pyramid from the pyramids. Of course, when they were built as tombs that needed to, they had that expectation of building fears into people, of being, I'm the son of God, I'm present on earth. They didn't look like that. They didn't have a city that was closely encroaching to the site. What we're seeing today is that these places are in a very new reality. They are in a very densely populated urban environment. And this has changed completely also the understanding of what we need to do to manage and protect them. The fact that there's a boundary is not anymore enough to ensure its protection. Why? Because they are tourist areas. They see millions of visitors every day. The condition, the use have changed over time. And there's much more the need today to work with colleagues that work, for example, with the urban department, with the traffic department, with our tourist departments. And I want to bring you somewhere else, because if Cairo looked densely populated, I want you to look at this reality, which is extremely densely populated. This is the most densely populated area of Europe. This is Naples, and in the area of Naples and its surrounding, there are two very important archaeological sites, which many of you know because there were cities and accidentally became large tombs. We're talking about of Pompeii and Herculaneum. They were completely covered by a volcanic eruption. Today, the management and conservation of these places is not just looking at conserving the site, but also being able to manage the site in an area that is incredibly densely populated, but that also needs to find ways to continue to be meaningful to local residents, to also be able to deliver benefits to local residents in one way or the other. So managing our heritage is very much something interconnected. We are working with colleagues from all sectors, and when we're talking about management, we're talking about the need to stop talking to ourselves. It's very much talking to others, and as I was saying, from the colleague that looks at traffic, from other colleagues that deal with urban planning, everyone needs to be informed and needs to be also understanding what these heritage places are. If colleagues in the urban planning, in the development departments understand why a place is a heritage place, while a place is designated as a World Heritage Site, it's much easier to find ways to collaborate with one another, to find common solutions, and to already tackle problems before they become problems. And one of the key problems for a long time, and I can say this for the Italian context, for example, was that we treated heritage as something that was for the specialist. It was something that people needed to look at it from outside. You come, see this heritage place on your Sundays, pay a hefty ticket, but then you go. Today we have a very different understanding of this. We want people to have ownerships of these sites. We also understand that local communities can have knowledge in relation to the sites, and they can provide us enormous support to be able to do our work. As Sarah was already saying in relation to Peru, in this complex world also, and Heide already mentioned this, we are looking at a brand new reality, and the brand new reality is climate change. That is changing the game for everyone. All our sites are facing new reality. We have increased extreme weather events. We have climatic condition, environmental conditions that are changing. And a lot of these new, let's say, hazards can lead to disasters that can affect our sites. And more often than not, is not something that generates within the site, but is something that our sites will be affected by. And we need also to get better at talking to our departments that deal with disaster risk management, that are first respondents, to really share what we need and what we can offer in these situations. So today we see that heritage management really look like something that is much more complicated. I make this joke all the time, so I'm sorry if someone has already heard it, but when I decided to study archaeology was specifically because I didn't like talking to people. I just didn't want to talk to people, and I thought archaeology will do this for me, and I'm never gonna have to talk to someone else in my whole life. And the first day on the field, my professor said, forget about it. If you're doing archaeology, you have to talk to people all the time. For permits, to deal, to find workers, to do all of this. And slowly, slowly, when speaking also with colleagues from the heritage sector, in all situations, colleagues that are dealing with protected areas, everyone will say the key is finding ways to talk to people, finding their way in into other departments, finding their way in to talk and to work with others. So this understanding really became the base of the work that we have been doing as World Heritage Leadership Program together with our colleagues at UNESCO, ICCROM, ICOMOS, and IUCN, in really finding that way of what we need to better understand our heritage places. What is that we need to make sure that we have all the information, we have a deep and deeply rooted understanding of our heritage places to be able to improve our management. And we really started from the very beginning in how do we assess and how do we understand the values of our heritage places? How do we look at what is important? The World Heritage Convention is known for being everyone's happy moment. It's the most ratified convention on the planet today. It's a huge success. But we know that it's also a big headache because we're often talking about heritage values. And we know that heritage values is not something that is at times very easy to understand or something that is directly related to our own legal systems, and it has created over time some issues. But the two key elements of the World Heritage Convention, and especially how we manage heritage places within the World Heritage Convention, is really values and attributes. The first is understanding the reason why a place is important, and understanding what is that we need to conserve and protect. So how do I see that value within my site? What are those elements that need to be put on a map, that I understand that I need to do conservation, that I need to take management decisions, that I need to talk to other colleagues to ensure their protection? And in the case specifically of the World Heritage Convention, and this I believe it's a very, very well understood context within Korea because you have had many successful nominations, but we do have also an added variable at times, which is an international level of recognition that is the outstanding universal value. And this is connected to those sites that are inscribed on the World Heritage List, understanding that the significance of these places is so exceptional that goes beyond national boundaries. There are sites that are important to everyone. But when we're looking at heritage values, we're really looking at all the reasons why a place is important. We're really looking at understanding the complexity of why a place is important. World Heritage sites, they are not only about the outstanding universal value. That is that higher level that we decide to recognize as internationally important. But these places have values that are national or they are locally important. And for us, it's fundamental that we do understand and we map all this reality, which also means that we have a different understanding also of who is in charge of defining what heritage is, or who is in charge of defining what are the heritage values or the values of a heritage place. And we're moving from an expert-led system into a system where experts do contribute. They are essential also to provide that interpretation. But where we have rights holders, we have indigenous people, we have communities, and we have other stakeholders that can contribute knowledge. And we need to be very aware of establishing systems also where this can happen. And the way we establish this system also needs to look at ensuring that places are legally protected and they are factually protected. And to do this, there are two fundamental elements. On one side, we need to address the factors that are affecting our heritage places and world heritage sites. But on the other, we also need to be aware that, as I was already saying, our heritage places, our archaeological site, exist in very complex systems. And these complex systems can be economic, they can be social, and they need to be understood thoroughly. I start from the factors because it is essential for us to be able to ensure the conservation and the management of a place long term, is to really address and understand these factors to be able to take adequate management measures. But these management measures cannot be adequate if we don't understand the context in which we're operating. A management solution in Korea will not be the same as a management solution in Italy, in Canada, or in Zimbabwe, for example, because at times the condition, especially for management, will be very different. Some of our places are being completely depopulated. We are seeing realities with Shirakawa-go in Japan, for example, where one of the key issues is people living. We have then, though, realities where population is actually going up and up and up, putting a lot of pressure on our heritage places, especially those that are in urban environments. We have realities of poverty, and poverty is everywhere and is very diverse. We have a global index of poverty, but then we have also a national index of poverty, where we can see that even within wealthy societies, there are areas where poverty exists and we need to be aware of. I always like to make people note this because at times political instability is a key challenge for managing heritage. Your budget is changing constantly. Your agendas are changing constantly. You are constantly needing to readjust to a new system. In Italy, we have mastered the idea of changing governments. We have done it so much at a certain point that some government lasted less than a season of football. It was easier to look at your sport for the whole season than to remember the name of your ministries. We also live in a world where we need much more infrastructure. The world is evolving so fast. Everyone wants internet, everyone wants access to water, wants access to services. And of course, this is putting a lot of pressure on our sites as well. A lot of our sites are in places that are ideal for the development of renewable energy. But we need, of course, to be very careful because some of these development can have a negative impact on our heritage sites. And also here, the earlier we have the chance to communicate why a place is important and what we're protecting, the easier it is also to talk to developers and to our colleagues in urban and development planning agencies. We also have improved our understanding of why it's important to protect heritage. And we went from an understanding that us, as heritage fanatics and lovers, we love heritage, to an understanding that people love heritage and that people are fundamental to protect heritage. But that heritage places can also deliver a lot of benefits to communities. Protected areas deliver ecosystem benefits. Some of these protected areas coincide with archaeological sites. There's an enormous overlap. We also see, and this we've seen especially during the times of Corona, of COVID, going to heritage places played a fundamental role for mental well-being. Being able to take a stroll, to go to a park, to go to an archaeological site, was something that was very treasured by people that couldn't move. They couldn't move more than 20, 30 kilometers. Our heritage places also play unique role of social cohesion, from bringing people together. You see here an example of St. Patrick's Day being celebrated in the visitor center of Newgrange. But also in the case of Mosul, for example, where after a war, the reconstruction of heritage is an essential and a key moment for community to come together. It's source of education, is a source of employment. This morning we had the wonderful chance to visit one of the Johnson tombs, and it was fantastic to see kindergarten kids already being involved in going to an archaeological site, having the chance to see a site, to explore this reality. And this plays a fundamental role in many places in the world. The pile dwellings of the Alp, it was the first archaeological site I visited as a child. I was 6 years old, they brought us there, and that was the day I thought, maybe I want to be an archaeologist. Let's see it back, but maybe I want to be an archaeologist. But they also offer direct employment, and direct employment, we have it, for example, when we are looking at conservation, where we are looking also at our excavation campaigns. These are means in which we can also employ people and communities. And then tourism. And tourism is something that we can see at the level of being employed at a site, being employed at a heritage place. But we can also think about the economy that is around the place, the cafes, the restaurants, the libraries, the bookstore. It is a much bigger world of cultural tourism, of nature tourism that we're looking at. And so really we are contextualizing this need to understand the place in a wider management system, framework for managing World Heritage, but also for managing heritage, much more in general, in heritage places, where we're looking at understanding a heritage place as the key, but also looking at how fundamental it is to know all this, to understand a place in detail, to be able to effectively manage it. And I would like to take just a couple of minutes to go over the aspect of governance, because this is where we see, and especially through courses and especially through capacity building, just to contextualize, the World Heritage Leadership Program meets about 200 to 250 people and participants in courses per year. And these are courses where we focus specifically on World Heritage management, and a lot of the factors that we see having a potential negative impact on our heritage places is the lack of adequate governance arrangements. Looking at the aspect of having a clear understanding of who are the managers, who has a mandate and a responsibility toward heritage, who are the rights holders that have certain rights in connection to a place. This could be indigenous people, but they can also be residents, they can also be homeowners, for example. And then understanding at the wider panorama of stakeholders that are connected and linked to the site one way or the other. And at times these roles can overlap, especially when we're looking at indigenous communities and we're looking at indigenous people. At times, communities, indigenous communities, rights holders are also managers of the site. And this is an example I want to share with you from Rapa Nui National Park. This is a site in Chile where the protection, both of the protected area and the archaeological site, is entrusted to the indigenous community. Indigenous communities are not just connected to the site, but they also have the capacity, and in certain cases they are the main management authorities. So what we have really put a lot of emphasis is on the need to get much better at, I promise I will finish very quickly, the need to really understand this panorama, understanding very clearly who are all the institutions, the people and communities that are involved with our site, understanding who they are, understanding what is also the decision-making power, the power they have versus the interest they have, understanding also how we can support certain groups that are interested, that have a lot of interest to gain more power. This is often the case of local communities. How do we engage them better? And the way we engage people can be very different. Of course, it will not always be the same. In certain cases, we have communities fully engaged. In other situations, we are starting off at the very beginning. We're looking at informing them, finding ways for them to be involved, to start to be consulted, and to really build that trust. Working with people is a matter of years, and it's a matter of trust building. Also understanding our legislation, who mandates the roles we have, the needs we have, but also the responsibility a manager has or a rights holder group has in relation to the site. And how do we understand if we have pieces of legislation that conflicts, they overlap, and how these relations are being managed. And we're all looking at complex national systems where often, and here I do believe that especially in the context of archaeological site, we do have at times that headache of having a protected area and an archaeological site where at times we are in conflict and we need to find common solutions. And this is also similarly when we are looking at the matter of management planning. Because for a long time, there was the understanding that the management plan needed to exist. But the understanding is that the management plan needs to exist and needs to directly link to bigger plan, to our national plans, to our regional plans, to really be linked also to what other departments are doing, to make sure that other departments, to make sure that other plans, strategies have that understanding of where heritage is, what are their needs, and what we can do to work together. To really build that middle level of our own specific plan to be linked both with the higher strategies, but also to be directly also referenced in our work plans. And here is the very last point I'm going to make, because one element that is very important is nature-culture linkages. And I said more than enough about this already, but this overlap between World Heritage sites and natural protected areas is something that is being also much more investigated today. We have a lot of work going on between our own departments. For example, the World Heritage Leadership brings together ICCROM and IUCN, so a body that is born for natural heritage and cultural heritage, but also at the level of convention. World Heritage is working much more closely with the Biodiversity Convention today, with our Ramsar Convention. And a couple of years ago, as a result of an expert meeting specifically on nature culture, there was an article that was published on the World Heritage Review. This is the favorite book of all the World Heritage nerds and freaks out there. And the article really pointed out that there's a remarkable overlap, especially for archaeological sites. And we are looking at an analysis, first of all, of the fact that we have about 20% of natural World Heritage property, cultural World Heritage properties overlapping with natural protected areas, and more than half are actually archaeological sites. And we have a remarkable overlap between archaeological sites and key biodiversity areas. And this is the last example that I have for you, because this is Skellig Michael, Shale Michil in Ireland. This is a small island, 12 kilometers off the coast of Ireland. This is an early monastery. It's a 6th century monastery that was built specifically with the purpose for monks leaving Ireland, being there, living in solitude, what we all need at times, to just go away, live in solitude for a little bit. But in this island, the overlap is 100%. The entire island is a key biodiversity area, and the entire island is also designated as a World Heritage property for cultural values. This is designated specifically as a World Heritage site, but protected also under different conventions. And over time, what the government of Ireland also has realized is that it's not just about fighting, but it's about also finding good ways in which shortcomings of one convention can be overcome by using the other convention, and finding ways really to build on one another. So the heritage place approach is really at the base of the resources we are working on, starting from the Enhancing Our Heritage Toolkit, the guidance and toolkit for impact assessment in a World Heritage context, and this has already been translated also into Korean. And now we're working on the manual of managing World Heritage, but I also invite you all to have a look at the resources that ICCROM has, because we did recently publish a book on heritage management. And in this book on heritage management, you will find many examples of archaeological heritage management that really bring all these elements to life, from governance to local communities' involvement to the specific aspect of nature-culture linkages. And the other one is that I would like to invite you all also to look at what is called the Panorama Nature Culture Community. This is an online platform where we collect case studies of good and effective management. And this is an invite to all of you to bring more Korean case studies. We really would like to see a lot of the good work that is being done in Korea. We started with colleagues in Suwon, who have recently posted their solution of community engagement for the protection of the fortress. But I will close my mouth now, and I want to thank everyone, specifically also colleagues at Enrich, Director Lim, also for bringing all of us here to talk about archaeology, because it's a wonderful opportunity for ICCROM, and we hope that this is the beginning also of many other networks. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다. 모든
Yes,
발표가
thank you very much.
끝났습니다.
So we have
장시간
heard all
앉아
four
계셔서 좀
presentations.
피곤하실 텐데요.
So
밖에
you might be
커피랑
quite
다과
tired
마련되어 있으니까
because
드시면서
we've been sitting down for
4시
many hours.
10분까지
So
다시
please
자리로
enjoy
와주시면
rich refreshments
감사하겠습니다.
outside
그리고
and be
오늘
back to
토론까지 마치고
your seats
나면
by
만찬이
10 past
준비되어
4.
있습니다.
After the
참석해주신
panel
모든
discussion,
분들
we'll be able to offer
가능하시니까요.
dinner to
끝까지
participants.
자리해 주시기
So please stay with us
그러면
until
4시
the end of the
10분에
program.
토론을
So we
시작하도록
will begin
하겠습니다.
the panel discussion at 4:10.
그리고 한 가지 더 차량을
And
가져오신
one more thing,
분께서는
if you
접수처에
have your vehicle
그 주차 등록을
with
해주시면
you,
됩니다.
please get your parking validated at the registration desk. Thank you.
a break.
자리에 앉으시면 오늘
So
토론을
we're going to
맡아주신
begin with the
선생님들을
discussion
소개해드리도록
once you're all
하겠습니다.
seated.
문화유산
Let me
조사
introduce our
연구와 올바른
panelists.
보존 방향에 대해
And we're
늘
going
고민하시는
to first introduce
문화유산위원회
Professor
위원장님이신
Kang Bong-won from
경주대학교
Kyungju
강봉원
University, who is
교수님이십니다.
also the head of the Cultural Heritage Committee. So always striving
한국
for the
고고학의 미래와
preservation and
세계화 그리고
investigation of
미래 세대
heritage.
양성을 위해
We also
힘쓰시는
have
한국
Professor
고고학
Lee Sung-ju from
기장님이신
Kyungju National
경북대학교
University, who's
이성주
also the head of
교수님이십니다.
the Korea Archaeological Society, who's striving for
고대
the
왕릉에 대한
generation
해석과
of
소통
future
또한 고대
experts on
왕릉의
this
관리와
area.
보존을 위한 도전
I asked
등에
for
대해
a
열띤
spirited
토론을
discussion
부탁드립니다.
on
그럼
the
마이크를
preservation and
강봉원
management
교수님께
and the
넘기겠습니다.
interpretation of burial
자유롭게 진행해
and
주시기
ancient
바랍니다.
tombs. Professor Kang, please.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I am Bong-won Kang. I'd like to make a brief comment about the 4 different presentations this afternoon. I was very impressed by their excellent presentations. I thought they were a little bit tired because there is a huge time difference between Mesoamerica and Europe and other places. But I realized that they are now completely sober, and I think they overcame the time difference completely. They talked a lot about different topics this afternoon, and we are going to ask a few questions about each presentations. And I'd like to say thanks to the people who planned and organized this entire symposium. This is very important thing because first of all, not many Korean people have been exposed to this kind of archaeological stuff, like Mesoamerican archaeology and also other conservation philosophy and also conservation sciences in general. So it is I think it's a great opportunity for us to get familiar with archaeology other than Korean stuffs. So that is why I think it's very good opportunity for us to get exposed to other archaeological stuff. This is my impression, and I am going to ask a few questions later. But first of all, I'd like to hand this mic to Professor Sung-ju Lee. He's going to ask a few questions about each different topics. First, please go ahead.
네, 저는 한 세 분에게 질문을
So
드리고
I
싶습니다.
am going to ask questions to
맨
3
먼저
presenters, starting with
발표를 해주신
first of all,
토마스 메라스 카스타뇨
Mr. Thomas Maras
선생님께
Castaño.
질문을 드리겠습니다. 선생님 발표 아주 인상적으로
So that was
들었습니다.
a very impressive
고고학
presentation.
자원,
So you talked
문화유산의
about the archaeological
보존의
resources
배경과
and
철학이
cultural heritage, and you mentioned that the talked about the evolution of the philosophy and background of preserving these heritage in much detail.
특히 이 문화유산을 보존하는 어떤 배경이 되는 어떤 철학과 원칙에 초점을 맞추어서 발표를 해주셨는데요.
You focused on the philosophy of preservation.
19세기 이 선각자들의 어떤 생각과
I believe the visionaries from the 19th century had their philosophies and their practices, and in the modern times we have the principles of preservation reflected in conventions, and you compare them.
제가 생각하기에
And I think
2차 세계 대전을 기점으로
after World War II,
후가
I think that was a turning point.
이 문화유산 보존에 원칙과 철학이
that
크게 바뀌었다고
shifted
생각을 합니다.
the principle and philosophy of
과연 그
conserving
변화의
cultural
본질적인
heritage.
성격이 무엇인지
So
그리고 그러한
I
변화를
wonder
가져온
what the nature of this change was,
문화유산
the shift
보존의
was,
경험이라든가
and
역사적
what kind of
배경이라든가
experience or historical background that triggered this transition into a modern principle of conversation. That's my question.
Thank you so much for the question and for this introduction on what we have covered throughout our presentations. I think the major change during the 19th century was also the consolidation of the sciences applied not only to conservation but also to archaeology as well, and like the use of tools and other specialists coming towards multidisciplinary teams. So the notion also to get a little over the old school on just the stylistic or the style of conservation or preserving monuments only because of their style was, I think, was introduced heavily during this period. So I think this is the base eventually that what we in the conservation field started calling scientific conservation became so relevant, particularly after the war, as the methodology to follow and to gather information, to put it to the service for conservation, but also management. At the end, it was the way that we build up on the decision making. So I think the shift comes in a very strong way on how we explain our decision-making processes from the stylistic, historical, or aesthetic background then to the more scientific and also in a more collective way of working towards the same goal of decision-making for preservation.
Did he answer to your question? If you have more questions, please go ahead.
네, 네 없습니다. 감사합니다.
No, I don't. And thank you very much for that answer. So my next question goes to Director Sarah Pasapera Rojas.
제가 이 모체의 피라미드를 몇 년 전에
Several years ago, I actually visited the pyramids of the Moche civilization, and I drove to the site along the coastal road with my wife. And it was Huaca Rajada, right? And Dos Cabeza and Huaca de Luna and Trujillo were the areas that I visited with my wife. And while I was looking at the pyramid, I was amazed by the architecture. Because in one architecture, they had a square and a temple, palace, and the areas for administration at the same time. And also they had different stories of the grades for their ancestors. So I was amazed by its structure and vastness. As an archaeologist, I was also amazed by your efforts in discovery and investigation.
이 강줄기 안데스에서 내려오는 강줄기마다 이 모체 피라미드가 있습니다.
Each river stream that comes down the Mount Andes, there are pyramids of Moche. The numbers vary, but I was able to feel the consistency throughout the culture. And of course, I believe there are differences in the pyramids because it was built by different communities. And one thing that caught my eye in your presentation was that you were making efforts to engage the local community to your work. So you're carrying out various activities to this end. In fact, that
고고학자들이 발굴을 못하도록 지역 주민들이 반대를 했고 그러던 유적이라고 제가
was one that the residents opposed the discovery and excavation by archaeologists. But I was surprised to know that you are now going to the extent of encouraging them to engage in the site And
일원이라고 그 원주민들이
the natives are a part of that community. So, to reach that level of engagement, what kind of activities did you carry out?
Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Me permite ampliar
Thank you for the question.
Bueno, en Sipán especialmente nosotros tenemos
To go into the details, in Sipán, one of the remaining issues that we face is the looting of the artifacts that goes on even now. So there are attempts to loot the artifacts, which is why we are cooperating with the police to guard these sites. But compared to the past, such attempts are on the decline. For example, for us to cooperate with the residents, we need to provide a lot of opportunities, including education sessions for the children. So in these sessions, we make Lego-like toys and use them to help the understanding of the children. We build something with a Lego, and we pull out some of the Lego pieces and let the children know that with the missing pieces, we cannot understand the full aspect of the entire result, which is the same for archaeological heritage. At the same time, experts from various fields, including archaeologists, talk about the importance and value of preservation with the local residents. And one of the tools that we value the most is providing sessions on explaining the artistic value of the artifacts. So children will participate in these sessions to put on a show, or the community will participate in the parties that we throw, and we could showcase the garments that were from the Moche civilization in order to deepen their understanding, especially when we have a festival, such an event. The residents will pretend as if they are ladies or people from the Moche civilization by wearing costumes. So these engagement activities and outreach are very important. And our efforts for preserving the artifacts and heritage must be multifaceted.
Thank you. 감사합니다. 예. 그럼 다음
Thank you.
니콜 프란치스치니
Let me move on to
선생님의
Nicole.
발표에 대해서 간단하게 질문을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 선생님의 발표에서 정말 인상적인 얘기를 많이 들었습니다.
Your presentation was very impressive.
대화를 많이
Archaeologists must talk with other people,
굉장히 인상적인
which was very impressive.
그리고 그 생태적 보존
And you also mentioned that these heritage sites overlap with biodiversity areas, protected zones, so we need collaborative efforts in preserving them, which was very interesting.
보존이 장소적으로 일치하는 곳이 20
And you also mentioned around 20% of the sites overlap, which was quite notable.
그리고 문화 유적지를 보존하는데
And in preserving cultural heritage,
유적지가 어떠한 가치를 갖고
we need to identify and evaluate the values the heritage hold and understand first why we need to preserve the
그것을 둘러싸 모든 것을 다
heritage
이해해야
and
된다.
also make efforts to understand all of the aspects that surround it.
제가 질문 드리고 싶은 거는
So
그 선생님께서 발표하신 그
my
생태학적인 문제
question is related
거기에
to
대해서 질문을 드리고 싶습니다.
the
지금
biodiversity issue.
인류세의 시대다.
So we are living in the era of the Holocene,
인간이 이 전 지구적인 변화를
Anthropocene.
일으키는 주인공이
And
되어버린 것이죠.
So
예.
humans
그렇게
are
인간이
the
전
culprits
지구적인
that
변화를
trigger
가져오게
global
된
change.
가장 최근 그러니까 20세기 중반부터다라는 그런
And
의견도
this
있지만
trend, some say, started
사람들이
from the
농경을
mid
시작하면서
20th century, but others say that this
전
already
지구적인 영향을 미치기
started
시작했다는
from
의견도 있습니다.
the
저는
agrarian
공학자이기
society.
때문에
I'm an
후자에도
archaeologist, so I actually believe that the latter argument is more
그렇다면
persuasive.
이 인간이 농경을 시작한 이후에 끊임없이
So after
자신의
people started to farm,
자신의 이 생태적 적소들을 구축하고
they have been
확장하는 가운데
building and meeting their ecological needs and expanding their reach, ecological reach, and they started to infringe on the habitats of wildlife and undermined the biodiversity, which was the reason for many of the global challenges that we face now. So in that case, in the modern era, the issue of preserving heritage and including the heritage that are located within the biodiversity preserved areas,
생태적 보존에 대한
there will be various methods.
이해를 갖기 위해서 과거에
And for us to
구축된
have an
기념물이나
understanding on the
과거의
preservation of
도시
biodiversity,
유적들이라든가 이런 것들에서 지금 현재 우리 위기 의식과 관련된 생태적인 문제들을
how
사람들한테
do we
설명할
need
수
to
있는 그런
raise the
방식이
awareness on the importance of reflecting the biodiversity issues in preserving cultural heritage?
혹시 여기에 대해서 설명을 해주셨으면
That's my question.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee, and I do think that you made excellent points, and I do agree on the aspect of farming. I do believe that the big change, of course, is over the years, especially when a lot of the archaeological places that we have seen, those especially when we're looking at before Common Era, we're looking at places that, yes, they started modifying the environment, but it was civilization that also had a clear understanding that they were settling a city or they were settling in a place because the environment had that capacity to sustain and to provide ecosystem services in a way already back then. And I do think that the big change is really when we move from the aspect of subsistence farming to industrialization. Once we started producing and we started producing to sell, we started producing to also the fact that in the world we move from being millions to billions. And I do think that, of course, there's much more pressures that are coming into this, and especially the increased population has really exacerbated also our use of the planet. And we see today that quarter to the year we have already used up all the resources of Earth, which is incredibly problematic. But I do believe that archaeology has a lot to give to this discussion. First of all, is what we see is that there's a lot of scientists that are looking at climate scientists that look also at archaeological evidence to see also changes into climate, to also look at the ways in which flora and fauna has changed over century and over millennia, to understand, for example, how we can support local species and introducing local species, especially when we're looking at plants, where we're looking at flora, the importance really of bioarchaeology, ecology that considers archaeological data. So I do think that I'm at times confronted with people that say, why do we need archaeology today? Isn't it like just about old stuff, and why are we doing that? Well, I do believe that the work that is done in archaeology can provide a lot of data and evidence to find common solutions. There's a lot to learn from the past, and I do think that we can fit in this discourse, especially in understanding biodiversity, and I do think that as we are today looking at working better with one another, we see that we can find ways in which we can both draw, let's say, positive elements from having both protections. There are archaeological sites. There's, for example, a border wall, a Viking border wall in northern Germany, where the entire buffer zone is actually designated as a Nature 2000 protected area. And the Nature 2000 is one of the highest level of protection at the European level. So the heritage is actually has an additional layer of protection that is given by being also designated as a natural area. And vice versa, because in a way also we can support colleagues that work with biodiversity, looking at the way in which we protect heritage. And what we're trying to also communicate, especially in relation to this heritage place approach, and to finding ways to work better with one another, is really that we need to start understanding the panorama of players, of managers, of institutions that have a mean to contribute to the work we do, but also understanding how we can contribute to their work. And at times it is as simple as having a table, a round table, where everyone has the chance to know each other and trying to overcome some of the key challenges. And what we have seen, for example, in some of the mountain areas is big conflict between nature protection and, for example, archaeologists that are studying with glaciers melting, doing excavation in these areas, and at times have been considered to be problematic. But solutions have been found, and solutions have been found together. We can't find solution as long as we keep on thinking singularly, because we end up that we might create problems for someone else, for the colleagues that is an ecologist, for the colleagues that is a geologist. Well, I do believe that also what we have seen in recent years is that I believe the field of archaeology has been growing much more than other sectors. Our profession has looked at including a lot of different profiles that are already related to ecology, to biology, to conservation scientists in terms of nature conservation. We are looking at data and evidence now in a much more complex and nature-cultured, interconnected way. And what we also see is that knowing the environment is fundamental for us to do excavations, to understand the research, to understand the history of a place, to understand the story also of a place, and to really understand the civilization and the cultures that we're trying to study. So apologies, Professor Lee, I was very long with my thinking.
I think there are some Korean conservation scientists in this room. But the history of conservation science is not that long in Korea. In the past, Korean archaeologists took part in excavation, and they discovered lots of archaeological features and also lots of artifacts. And that was it. And they did not, a lot of archaeologists did not pay attention to how they had to preserve recovered artifacts at all. So in the meantime, lots of discovered artifacts were getting perished. So having said that, to Thomas and Nicole visited National Gyeongju Museum and also Heavenly Horse Tomb, like tomb number 155. So I am assuming that you looked at artifacts displayed at the museum and also inside of the tomb. What do you think about all those things? What Korean people did in terms of conservation science? Yeah, Tom and Nicole, yeah, respectively, please.
Well, I have to say that for me it's a pleasure to visit this kind of heritage because it's so rich and impressive, and the level of dexterity and dexterity and the skills put in the production of those objects is incredible. So I think it is highlighted in the exhibition how the technology of the Three Kingdoms and Silla particularly was put in the production of these objects. But also I think that the common ground is the connection with their environment, and not only the physical environment but also the symbolic environment. So looking into the tombs as they were used and this interpretation setting is very, very useful to understand what happened at the time that these tumuli and tombs were produced as an object or as a monument, but also the solution and the lecture of reality the people of Silla had at the time. So I think it is incredibly important so we can go back to these places and learn those lessons. And for me, that I come from a different country or different reality, it's a great opportunity also maybe to learn what was the solution at the time. What was the important relationship with nature, with other people, with the resources they have access to. So at the end, conservation at the material level, at the physical level, is really well done. And but the conservation of the idea and what we should learn from them, I think it's the most important that we should share with others.
Yes, I actually built on Thomas's answer because I do agree and I follow on this. And what I think was also very important for me was really to see the willingness also to communicate all this, putting extra effort for information to be accessible, for information to be presented to the public. I do think it's something that is truly admirable, to make sure that at times what are complex data, what might be more specialist or specific data and information are translated to the public, and the way the public can really absorb this information is fundamental for archaeology, but for all the heritage we're trying to protect. And I do think that this was really something that in Gyeongju, the fact that I couldn't speak Korean, but there were images, there were movies that allowed me to better understand this place and to really get also an understanding of why connections were important, why there were certain natural elements that were important, but also, you know, why there was so much gold. And it was the first thing we noticed, of course, was the gold and the gold crowns, but to really try to have a view into someone else's culture and be able to absorb it and be able also to understand it, I think is something that is truly admirable. And I wish for a lot more archaeological sites to really pick up also on this, because one way for people to care is also for them to have an easy access into the profession, to have an easy access on the reason why it's important. And you know, in certain countries, in my country, at times when we talk about archaeology, we're talking about taxpayers' money. And we're talking about, at times, deciding whether we invest money in culture rather than in a hospital, rather than in other facilities. And at times, people struggle to see the full value of why we need to invest X number of money, because it's not so accessible. The importance this place has is not so accessible for them to visit it. And I think it was really admirable to see that, you know, we had school children, we had people on their Sunday stroll going to an archaeological site, and it really shows the appreciation people have for these places.
Thank you. And I'll ask you too. There is a lot of differences between Korea and Mexico and Peru in terms of climate condition, now and past as well. However, as we looked at so many slides, there are a lot of similarities between Korea and these two countries in terms of mortuary practices. So I was surprised. So did you realize that? As a matter of fact, you too also visited National Gyeongju Museum and also visited Heavenly Horse Tomb. So you may have realized there is a little bit of similarities between your country and your country. So what do you think about the similarities? What was the factor?
Well, I think at the end, all humans arrive to the same decisions. At the end, when they die, they want to be noticed. They want to reassure their power in the society they lived, like Pacal did, and they want their achievements to be known for everybody. So in the case of Pacal, we have a writing that just been recently read, and so we can read more or less what he did and understand what he wants to put in this tomb. And we were talking about, for example, also the things that he was also had a pearl in his mouth, like the tombs we saw today in Korea. The king also had a pearl in his mouth. And you know, from the place Pacal was living, so far away from the sea, to bring a pearl, it's something difficult and important. And what does it mean in Mayas and in Korea and in Peru? So we were astonished by the way all different societies arrive to similar solution, as you are remarking. And as you were already noticing in your absolutely wonderful museums, where we can understand things without even speaking Korean, as Nicole says, I was amazed because we need to arrive to those kind of solutions for our public. I'm learning a lot from your museums that I will really try to bring to ours. So we need people to be able to understand perfectly the process of these people dying, these people, what they did, all the architectural achievements they get, because in the case of this Maya building, they are astonishing also. And I think we haven't been able to transmit all that information to the public as you already did. So I'm really learning a lot about your museums and the way you are pedagogically able to make the people understand it. So I'm bringing a lot of things to my country from your contribution, so I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Bueno, yo creo que una de las cosas más interesantes que nos asemejan, independientemente de los escenarios geográficos, es que hay la necesidad de vincular. Y lo que he podido observar en
I
Corea
also
y
believe that there are a lot of similarities. So what I saw in Korea is something that Mexico and Peru are striving for, which is to connect the modern people and the people from the past. In the case of Korea, I was most amazed to see that the general public want to know their roots. Korea is a technological powerhouse, and you're utilizing the technology to deepen your understanding on the past, which was amazing. Peru also must benchmark this example, I think. We are engaging in such efforts, partially, but in Korea, you're at a different level, I believe. We visited museums and various sites and could see the preservation techniques and efforts for the artifacts. In Peru, before the discovery by the Spanish, so for that area as well, we need a more deeper understanding archaeologically to be able to take pride in our culture. And as an archaeologist, based on theoretical work, we are exploring more information that should be conveyed to the public. And we need more efforts. Until now, We are only reaching out to the local community, but this must be expanded to include the entire public of Peru. In this regard, we have a lot to learn from Korea. And I do believe that Koreans will take pride in this, and we will benchmark this in Mexico and Peru. So the people could better understand their cultural identity. As an archaeologist, we do see similarities between countries and regions. You also mentioned the climate. The Sipán area is very arid. It's dry, and it's a challenge to overcome
One
this.
more specific question. You mentioned that you talked, when you were explaining about tomb number 3, Peru archaeologists are not able to identify the owner of the tomb. And you made an assumption that Korean archaeologists are able to identify the owner of the tomb according to historical documents. And yet, there is a lot of controversies over the owner of those burials located in downtown Gyeongju. Now, you visited Heavenly Horse Tomb on Sunday afternoon. Now, over the owner of that burial, there are still talking about the owner of the burial. We do not know. There is no definite answer. So how we interpret the historical documents? So at least there are at least 3 or 4 different lists. So historical documents are not very decisive, give us not a decisive clue to us. So that is that is the problem we have been facing for a long time. And another question is that this is a little weird question. At the end of 19th century and at the beginning of 20th century, a lot of European archaeologists and historians talked about transoceanic migration. According to that theory, pyramids located in Mesoamerica were built by Egyptian people who actually, yeah, there was that theory. I'm wondering if there are still people who are arguing that theory.
Well, maybe yes. There's people who still do that theories, and there's people who still say that Bacal is in a special name, going to heaven and going to the moon and things like that. And if you look at Bacal in the web, you will see crazy interpretations about him. He's going to the moon, to fly into somewhere. And also the aliens help him to make the pyramids. And you will find a lot of people making a lot of saying a lot of crazy things about that. But the thing is, Bacal was really named. They knew that the tomb belonged to Bacal because when Alberto Ruz discovered the tomb, nobody knew who was there. They knew he was a very important person, of course, because of the size of the building was built for making his tomb. But then after Yuri Norosov, a Russian, finally, because he was a linguist, discovered how the Maya glyphs could be interpreted. He was such a genius. He speaks like, I don't remember, 14, 13 languages. After him, they could more or less understand who was there. So that was really important also, understanding. And then all the site, all the other buildings had glyphs that already talk about his life. So that's why we could understand that all those buildings are related to him. But yes, there's people who still say many crazy things about the site.
Yeah, thank you very much. The reason why I asked that question is that until, well, now about 20 or until recently, Korean archaeologists, some Korean archaeologists believe that the high-mounted tombs located in downtown Gyeongju was built by
Egyptian.
No, not Egyptian. Scythian. Scythians.
Okay.
Yeah, that has been called horse rider theory. That is why I asked that question. Now, not many Korean archaeologists are supporting that theory these days, but yeah, it was quite popular until what, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Yeah, not any longer though.
Okay.
Now, not much time left. So okay, I'll take a few questions. Yeah, people who are in this room, please. Yes.
안녕하세요. 저 니콜 선생님께 질문이 있어서.
So I have a question for Nicole.
저는 이곳에서 약 2km 정도 떨어져 있는
So
풍납토성 조사 연구하고
I'm investigating a site called Pungnap-to-song. It's 2 kilometers away, and there's a lot of consensus in the academia that this is a palace site in the Paekje dynasty. But for the residents, it's something very vague. They cannot grasp the actual concept of that archaeological value. So during the urbanization of Seoul, before people knew that this was a historical area from Paekje, people started to build a village. And with the preservation of the heritage, the residents felt that they were deprived of their village.
이런 상황이 펼쳐질 때 실은 이 주민들을
When this kind of situation happens, we need to raise the awareness on the importance of the heritage and the value of the Paekje dynasty, which is not easy at all. In fact, a few days ago, some of the residents complained this to me as well. So as you work in ICCROM, do you see any examples with this deep conflict with the local residents and any secret to successfully persuading them?
I wish I knew the secrets to successfully solve all of them. I do think that it is a very important question, and I do know of several colleagues that are facing this issue, and we have colleagues that are facing this right now. We have some colleagues that have gone through it. I think from ICCROM side, we have no recipe. There is no recipe to solve this issue. I do think, looking back at the presentation, we had this matrix that talks about engaging people. And it can be seen both as a way to understand where you're at in your process, but also how to build up. And when I was saying that I really like the idea of becoming an archaeologist because I didn't want to talk to people, I mean it. I realized that this could have been a problem. But later on, I also realized that it's fundamental. And what we see often is that if this is not done, you have issues with vandalism. So you are continuing your work, but you don't have people on board. The sites get vandalized. The people that go and visit the sites their tires get slashed, their things are being brought away. So it's a long process, the trust building, but we would be more than happy, I think, to share some of these examples. And actually, the aspect of participatory approaches to world heritage, this is something that ICCROM had the chance to investigate thanks to the Republic of Korea, who supported the Living Heritage Program. And we have at least 2 publications that talk specifically about people-centered approaches. And one is a publication that looks in the specific at a consultation campaign that was carried out in Lake Ohrid, which is a mixed site, both natural and cultural, where you can see, first of all, how consultation with local community was carried out, what the results were, and how they created an action plan to improve the situation. I do think that there's a lot of case studies out there also. On the Panorama Nature Culture community, we do have some examples. The one I presented, for example, of the indigenous community in Rapa Nui, the case study is much more in-depth in this, and you can see also that it took time for this transition to go back to management being re-given back to the local community, but it was essential to go through the step of what I believe can be very painful and very difficult conversations, because of course people are afraid that their houses are going to be taken away from them, their gardens are going to be taken away from them, and this is something that is one of the biggest conflict into archaeology, that if we want to excavate something, there has been situations where people had to be relocated, but now is not always the case, because archaeological science also and research has gone way ahead. We have ways of investigating also that are different from just excavating. But I think taking the time to set that base for a good relationship with local community is what actually long-term will give archaeologists the ability to really do their work, and to also step-by-step explain why that work is important is something that I think we owe it to local community, no? We owe to local community to say, this place is important because, and we want your opinion on. But as I said, there is not one approach that's going to solve all the situations, but my suggestion is really to look at different ways of operating, and I'm more than happy also to connect with you and to share some of these case studies, but at times talking to some people that have gone through this themselves at their site can give you an understanding of what went wrong. It's very important to know from a person what went wrong. We often look at the end process, but there's no project that doesn't have moments of failure. And the moments of failure are the most fundamental, I believe, to learn from others about community involvement and working with communities. So I would be more than happy to go into the details of different cases, but in short, we don't have full solution, but there's a lot we can learn from one another, and also that we would like to hear from you about your case.
Thank you, Nicole. Time's getting up, but I'd like to take one more question. No? No, you have something to say. Please go ahead.
Simplemente agradecerles, ha sido una experiencia bastante
So,
enriquecedora poder
before
compartir
closing,
con
I wanted to extend my
todas las personas
gratitude
del
for
Perú,
this opportunity to learn
de
from the Korean
investigación del
case as
patrimonio
well from
cultural e interior,
ICCROM
algo,
officials.
porque
So
finalmente este
I
tipo de actividades nos
appreciate
retroalimenta y nos ayuda
everyone,
justamente
including the
a poder aplicar
National
algunas
Research
estrategias nuevas.
Institute
Yo
of
me voy
Korea
con
Heritage
la
and other
experiencia de
Korean
ese trabajo
organizations,
maravilloso
ICCROM, Korea
del
Heritage
tratamiento
Service,
paisajístico que
Korea
tienen aquí en
Archaeological
Corea y que
Society, and
para
Korea
nosotros,
Cultural
especialmente en
Heritage
la zona donde
Association. Thank you very
yo
much.
laboro, que es un área desértica, es una labor bastante interesante la que queremos también abordar.
So we are
Creo que
currently
muchas de las
working
cosas que hemos
in a desert,
aprendido
and I
en
hope
esta oportunidad
one
en la
day
que
you
hemos
could pay a
conversado va
visit to
dirigido
the site.
básicamente a vincularnos con
So
las comunidades
this
que
was
caen
an
en el entorno.
opportunity
Los
to
retos que
deepen
ustedes
our
tienen en Corea
dialogue,
también
and
los
I
tenemos
hope,
en Perú y creo que en
based
todo el
on our
mundo, con
discussion,
variantes
we
específicas de
could
acuerdo a las realidades
accelerate our
culturales de
efforts
cada
for
lugar.
preservation.
Simplemente quiero decir
And
que los
we do
esperamos
have
en Perú
different
cuando
cultural
puedan ir.
cultures,
Estaremos encantados
and
de poder
respecting the
recibirlos.
culture is very
Somos una sociedad que,
important
al igual que ustedes,
in
está en
our
constante
research.
transformación,
And I
con la
hope one
intención
day we will
de
meet you again in
superarnos y
Peru.
tratar de llegar a ese legado que teníamos desde
Peruvians,
hace
just
cientos
like
de años.
Koreans, have a
Gracias.
history of overcoming
Muchas gracias.
difficulties in preserving our centuries of history. Thank you.
I'd like to say something about the last issues that we've been talking about now. I would like to share experience with the person who asked, because one of the few things that have worked well in Mexico about gaining the people that had a problem with an archaeological sites is involve them in the conservation and the excavation process, and also try to hire them for making the new custodies. So that's been a new strategy that has become very successful. Not completely because salaries are not really good and things like that, but the policy is that you involve the people around, make them part of the archaeological and the conservation process, and if the site will be taken for the government or things like that, try to really put them in charge of the site, so they gain a salary now. So that works mostly in places where the people doesn't have a previous work involved, where they see this an opportunity. It doesn't work always, but I would like to share that with you. That's one of the few strategies that maybe have worked in some areas, not always. And I also want to notice that about something that Nicole says. For example, Palenque, that the surrounding looks like the pyramids of Egypt, because we have the archaeological site and the town has been growing and growing and growing and coming and coming and coming, and the jungle has been destroyed. So the archaeological site is now the area that protects also the nature, the animals, and everything. So the archaeological sites become very important to preserve the nature environment, and we have to work with biologists and people who take care of the sites only and the other perspective. And it's been hard because we are two institutions that has to get together and work together. And that's really some things that you have specialists from one area to the other having to talk to each other and making one plan, not two plans. So that's really hard, and we have to keep working on some things like that. And to finish, thank you very much. It's been an absolutely wonderful experience. People are so gentle and kind to us. I'm very grateful to all the people who has worked with us and has made this possible, and really thank you. The food is delicious. I really appreciate, and the spaces are wonderful, and your museums are absolutely an example for us that we should follow, and I'm very happy to be able to be here, and I really thank to all of you who made us possible to be here and to share all the experiences from our colleges, from Peru and from Korea. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your positive comment. Professor Lee.
네, 오늘 그 세계 여러 지역에서 문화유산의 어떤 보존 현황,
We were able to understand the current status of preservation
경험들에 대해서 들었습니다.
from various regions, and we were also able to understand the principles that we did not know in the past. So the murals of the Goguryeo dynasty were damaged and disappeared due to the tourists. So there are crises of heritage around the world, and our responses may differ by region, but through dialogue, we will be able to find new solutions, and that was the lesson from today's discussion. Let me extend my gratitude to the wonderful presentations of the four presenters. Thank you.
Please, brief comment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be very brief, and I do think that I really want to start by thanking, first of all, the whole team and everyone who has been so wonderful to bring us all here and to have a space to discuss world archaeology and to look especially at aspects of conservation and at aspects of restoration as well as management. It's not always easy, I think, to find these spaces, to have an international exchange, so it's something that is extremely admirable. But also to thank Heide and Seira for taking this adventure with us, because I do think that seeing those two case studies gave us a lot of food for thought also for our work at ICCROM. Professor Kang and Professor Lee, many thanks also for sharing your work, and we wish we had more of this, and we hope to take it out also and to take it back to ICCROM. And I would like really to invite everyone to share with us and to work with us. As ICCROM, we are more than happy to see colleagues coming to our institution. We have an incredible conservation library, it's one of the best libraries in the world. We are more than happy to welcome everyone who wants to do research, who wants to share also their work. We're happy, as I said, through the panorama case studies, but also to really thank, I think, what is really a national effort, because a lot of the flagship activities that ICCROM can do are supported in different ways by the Republic of Korea, either through Enrich or the Korea Heritage Service. Thomas can add to that, but for the program I work in, which is the ICCROM IUCN World Heritage Leadership Program, thanks to the Republic of Korea and the Korea Heritage Service, we run flagship programs on managing World Heritage that have provided the capacity to a lot of people from all around the world to get capacity building on World Heritage management. And this is something that is quite unique, and we're very thankful for this contribution. We're always happy to see that Korea has a strong involvement with our institution through our council members. So we really welcome this exchange, and we welcome also that we can strengthen this also at the level of professionals. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thomas.
Also, thank you so much. Gracias. Kamsahamnida. I think I only was asked on what happened in the 19th century, what happened at these big changes in the conservation approach. And I think that we are sitting here also because we cannot imagine any of our work without the connection with others. So at the level of professional, but I think at the level of human beings in this time that we share. So of course, I support the exchange at the level of institutions or governments, but also you can talk to each other, and feel free to reach out to these wonderful new colleagues that you have met and that we have learned from many years. If you have a trouble at the level of a tomb that you don't know what to do, or you want to share something incredible you have discovered, share it with them. And I think this will bring a very rich exchange that will last for many, many days to come. So thank you so much. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking part in this symposium, and thank you very much for your patience. That is all. Thank you.
네, 세계의고고학 학술대회 모두 마치겠습니다. 끝까지 자리해 주셔서
So we will now
감사합니다.
close the symposium. Thank you very much for being with us until the very end, and we will meet you next year. Thank you.
그 참석해 주신 분들 안내 드린 대로
And as was mentioned, in London Hall, we have prepared dinner. Starts from 5:30, so please be with us by 5:30 at London Hall.